Sounds like you'll have an alternate fold on there.
Ready? Ready? I call the order for the city of Petoskey, the city council for October 21st, 2024, and I ask that you rise with me for the pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk Beck, would you please call roll?
Demore, present. Shields.
Here.
Wagner is absent. Walker. Present. Murphy.
Present, we have a quorum. Next is a public hearing. It's the receipt of comments concerning programs and services as proposed by the city's Downtown Management Board for 2024 and recommended for financing by use of the special assessment method at a 3% rate increase compared to the 2024 formula. I turn it over to Downtown Manager Director Amy Tweeden.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members. I'll just give a brief overview of the budget for the assessment district. The 2025 budget includes a 3% increase over the 2024 special assessment levy in the downtown. The increase would augment the budget by $3,500 to a total budget of $276,300 with use of fund balance in the amount of $104,245. There is no parking fund transfer included in this year's budget, and the proposed levies would be for the first floor 21.63 per square foot of commercial space. Non-first floor would be 5.41 cents per square foot, and vacant land would be 6.49 cents per square foot. The budget is made up of the assessment being levied this year at 45%. 28% would come from our fund balance, 16% is fund revenue, and 2% is penalty and interest. Changes proposed for the 2025 budget. Previously, the calendar project was included in the image campaign that has been pulled out on its own line item. The public art expenditure has been moved to the parking fund. The focus for programs and service is on enhancing existing events, and the budget does still incorporate the sponsorship revenue from the trolley in the amount of $10,000. The breakdown of expenditures, 41% is administration, 28% is direct event expenditures, 18% is marketing and promotions, 8% beautification, including fall and holiday decorations and flowers for downtown, and then 5% is economic enhancement. Again, the total expenditures are proposed at $276,300. Revenue comes from assessments of downtown properties, programs, sponsorships, and other. And that is all proposed at $172,055. And that includes the 3% cost of living increase. And then revenue from the fund balance, which is approximately currently $244,000 of $104,245 will be the final revenue category. And then again, the existing levy rates are 21 cents per square foot for first floor. That would go to 21.63 cents per square foot. Non-first floor is 5.25 cents per square foot. That would go to 5.41 cents per square foot. Vacant land is 6.3 cents per square foot, and it would go to 6.49 cents per square foot. Again, the requirement is that a hearing be held and that you also have been presented with a resolution that could adopt the proposed budget.
Council, do you have any questions, comments? Motion? Public hearing first, okay. Open a public hearing on this. I'll close the public hearing. Now we'll go to city council for comments. Support, motions, Ms. Demore.
I just had a follow-up question. You said the public art expenditures moved to the parking fund. Can you just speak to that, please?
Sure. Last year was the first year the management board put funding into the budget for public art, and they put it in the programs and services. The programs and services budget is limited to being expended within downtown. And because it's not truly a program or a service, it's more of a capital expenditure that will be there 5 years or more. It's really more appropriate for it to come as a capital expense out of the parking fund.
It's not really parking either.
No, but that is where our capital expenditures are identified.
Thank you.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Amy, thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, I know that the Arts Commission has an annual budget of about $40,000, I believe that was allotted by City Council for 2024. So is the proposal for the Downtown Management Board to just give some kind of contribution to that fund for encouraging and creating art in public spaces, which would be restricted to the downtown vicinity for your portion?
Well, part of the reason for moving it out of programs and services is it could only be spent within the downtown in that fund. By being in parking, if council so directed it to go outside of downtown, it technically could. However, the management board has asked that that funding stay within the downtown district, if at all possible.
And at the last two Arts Commission meetings, it was understood that the art that was purchased in the tunnel, as well as Sunset Park, would not utilize the $10,000 that the Downtown Management Board wishes to put into it for art, sculpture, or murals, and that it would the money would stay there and be utilized for the downtown. So that's already been established and understood. Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor. I under new business, this was an opportunity to adopt the resolution. So I don't want continued questions. I had questions just about, I believe, there in the packet, there were no comments received from business owners. Is that correct? And what is the outreach to business owners that they're aware of this? Is it their responsibility to all the minutes? How is that communication received?
I would direct that question to Clerk Beck because she handles the assessment process.
Okay, thank you.
So notices were mailed to all property owners provided by the finance department. They were mailed on October 8th, and it's to the property owner, not businesses because the property owners are liable for the assessment. However, they want to ask for that funding from their tenants is dependent upon the property owner.
Thank you.
And I would also add that when the budget went to the management board, businesses who are on our MailChimp mailing got a copy of the budget, were asked to come to the management board and also the Facebook page.
Great. Thank you.
Anything else, council? Okay. Guess it will be coming up for a motion. Thank you. Moving right along. I have two proclamations to read. One is Indigenous Peoples Day. Whereas Indigenous Peoples Day was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Populations in the Americas. And whereas the United States endorsed the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People on December 16th, 2010. Whereas a growing number of cities and towns in the United States have recognized the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day as an opportunity to celebrate Indigenous heritage and resiliency. And whereas the city of Petoskey acknowledges that the historic, cultural, contemporary significance of Indigenous peoples of the lands that became known as the Americas. And whereas the city of Petoskey recognizes that long before the city of Petoskey was granted a charter in 1879, Odawa Bands villages shared this land. And whereas the city of Petoskey was named after Ignatius Petoskey as a way to honor and respect the thriving Indigenous community of this land. And whereas the city of Petoskey values the significant contributions made to our community by the Indigenous people, by knowledge, labor, technology, science, philosophy, art, resilience, and the deep cultural contributions that have shaped the character of the city, the state, and the nation. Whereas the city of Petoskey recognizes that the Indigenous people continue to contribute to the character, economy, and vitality of the city of Petoskey. Therefore, I, John Murphy, Mayor of Petoskey, do proclaim the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day in Petoskey. Yes, sir. The next one is on Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Whereas domestic violence, whereas domestic abuse perpetrators intentionally use the pattern of physical and emotional, sexual, physiological, psychological, and economic coercion and abuse to the control of their intimate partners, violating their dignity, security, and both psychological and physical well-being. And where the domestic abuse perpetrators cause significant and long-lasting trauma to countless individuals and families. And when children are involved, domestic abuse perpetrators' choices to be violent and abusive are parenting choices that often have devastating and far-reaching adverse effects and impacts on the safety and well-being of children and their non-offending parents. Whereas in 1922, the Michigan State Police Incident Crime Report indicated there were 69,765 domestic violence offenses reported to the Michigan law enforcement during the year. Whereas survivors of the domestic violence abuse are present in every Michigan community, regardless of sexual orientation, race, religion, ability, age, and gender identity. And where domestic abuse can be prevented through the collective voice and the power of individuals, families, institutions, and the systems working together toward the common goal. Whereas domestic Abuse Awareness Month provides the opportunity for the community members to learn more about and preventing domestic abuse and to show support for the organizations and individuals who provide critical advocacy services and assistance to the victims. Therefore, I resolve, John Murphy, that we proclaim October 2024 Domestic Abuse Awareness Month for the city of Petoskey. Next is a presentation, which I know we're all waiting for, to hear from Baird and Associates concerning Little Traverse Wheelway Restoration Project. I know everybody's looking forward to that.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me?
Okay. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Here, I'm just going to quick share my screen here. I apologize I can't be there today, but I'm happy that we have this opportunity to do it remotely. All right. Bear with me 1 second here. All right, just to confirm, is everybody able to see my screen in the full presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you very much. My name is Rory Agnew. I work with Baird and Associates, a coastal engineering firm that's been leading this study. I'm the project manager for Baird. I'm based out of our Madison, Wisconsin office. I also previously led the initial investigation that took place in 2020 after several small sloughing events were identified along this section of the Little Traverse Wheelway, which ultimately led to a couple of large-scale collapses, which I'm sure you folks are all too familiar with. So we put together a team of Baird, being the coastal expertise, as well as a geotechnical engineering firm, Geosyntec, as well as Beckett and Rader, a local landscape architecture consultancy. So here, I'll jump to the next slide here. So really what I want to do today is just run through and provide a brief background on the project. I think there's probably a lot more knowledge about the project or the Little Traverse Wheelway in general in the room in comparison to what I know, but I'll sum it up really quick. And the main reason I'm here is to provide an update with the work we've done to date in terms of looking at options for reestablishing the trailway and addressing the slope instability and coastal erosion issues that this stretch of shoreline is currently facing. Just as a quick background here, so the Little Traverse Wheelway, so if anyone's not familiar with it, the Little Traverse Wheelway is a 26-mile bike trail, a really iconic, amazing amenity for your guys' community, stretching from Harbor Springs all the way to Charlevoix. There's a map of it in the upper right-hand corner of the screen there, and the area that has the red box around it, that's the area that we're focusing on today or through this project. Locally, I think it's referred to as the Miracle Mile. So this is a really interesting section of the trail line that is right along the shoreline. It takes advantage of an old rail line, so it's elevated on the mid slope of a larger coastal bluff. And ultimately, it was constructed in 2009, and this segment here opened up, became a really popular segment of the trailway. However, around 2020, or just slightly before that, as many of you can likely recall, Lake Michigan water levels experience record high levels. So with that, it just brought significant storm or the potential for significant wave action along the shoreline, and erosion and degradation of the toe essentially led to several ongoing sloughing events along this reach of shoreline, as well as one major coastal collapse that took place right when we initially started looking at the trailway in 2020. So since then, from, I guess we'll call it the 2020 to 2023 period, the main goal through that time period was to look at what can be done to address the ongoing issues here. So this reach of trail line is interesting and complex in that The city of Petoskey maintains it. However, it goes through a handful of different properties. And just to clarify a little, in a little more detail, the stretch that we're looking at is between Magnus Park to East Park. And so initially thinking about what to do, there's kind of three main things. You could abandon it, you could relocate it, or you could reestablish it. Abandoning it, just being a major connection in this larger trailway system, seemed unrealistic. So the city took the route of looking at what they can do to move it along or relocate the trailway to the top of the bluff. So that's the image you see in the lower left there. This was a study that Beckett and Rader led to look at how we could move the trailway up parallel to Highway 31. And ultimately, there was some complexities associated with that, requiring tunnels and different infrastructure. And ultimately, it didn't do anything to address a problem that isn't going to go away, which is stabilizing this section of coastal bluff here. So there's the importance of the trailway from one perspective, but there's also there's many different stakeholders and things at play here, with Highway 31 located at the top of the bluff, being a critical thoroughfare for the region, as well as from just general safety perspectives. Improving the stability of this bluff is of extreme importance with respect to that. So yeah, looking at relocating it, the other two options that were assessed right off the bat, and these images on the lower right-hand side here on this frame are what we had looked at during the initial study. So it was two different solutions from a coastal perspective. One was to use a more traditional stone revetment along the shoreline to essentially protect from toe erosion due to wave action, and the other one was using a dynamic revetment. So that's using larger cobble material to build up a cobble beach along the toe. And the reason it's called a dynamic revetment is because it reshapes and forms with the over time due to the coastal processes that it's facing, which is really advantageous in, I guess, any day and age, but this day and age particular, where you have different threats associated with climate change and unknowns there. So having that dynamic nature, it is beneficial with that respect. It's also better from an ecological perspective in that it doesn't create a hardened shoreline. It doesn't serve as essentially a barrier between upland terrestrial habitat and aquatic habitat. So there's a lot of different things in terms of why the dynamic revetment is favorable. And ultimately, following these initial investigations, the city applied for an Eagle High Water Infrastructure Grant and was successful in that. And that's what led to this study that I'm going to present, or am presenting on today. So with that, I'll jump into where we're at and kind of the overall process associated with this project. Just as a high level overview, we have 5 different tasks associated with our project. So listening from top to bottom, we start with the field investigation. So that's really getting a good baseline condition to start with. This is more than just looking at topography and elevations of the land, including the water, which we call bathymetry. But it's doing borings and looking at subsurface soil conditions, installing groundwater monitoring instrumentation to essentially look at any kind of groundwater seepage, what those patterns are like and what impact that has on slope stability, as well as our designs. And yeah, there's all kinds of different things we looked at, which I'll touch base on with the field investigations. The next task, engineering analysis. So this is really a combination of both coastal analysis as well as geotechnical analysis. So really marrying those two and not looking at it in two distinct, I guess, expertises, but how do we work together and make sure that the whole project works together in sync, from top of the bluff to the bottom. The next task, preliminary design, that's really where we start to look at what kind of solutions are suitable for this site and go through and assess different options and ultimately start to play in a lot of the complexities here, including, say, constructability, regulatory feasibility, just throwing everything at it to look at what the most suitable option is. And then ultimately, going through this kind of process, getting stakeholder feedback, providing public input, to essentially refine our design for permitting and final design. So where we're at today is right around the 50% design milestone. The next couple slides, I just want to touch base on a few of these tasks and then follow up with some nice imagery and graphics of what we have currently proposed for the 50% design. So the field investigations, as I mentioned, we had done some boring investigation. So on the map in the background, you see a series of different dots with names or letters associated with those. Those are the different both historic and I guess present soil borings that we took as part of this effort. So we have a lot of really good data to help us characterize the subsurface conditions. And as I mentioned, we put groundwater monitoring wells in those in a handful of those borings as well. And that image on the upper right-hand side, it's a graph that shows different groundwater elevations that are recorded over time at different boring locations. So we use this information to fine-tune our seepage analysis and slope stability analysis. So yeah, amongst other things that we did, we've done initial on-site inspections where we've walked the site with structural engineers, geotechnical engineers, coastal engineers, just to look at all the various different factors at play. We've done a UAV survey. So this is mapping the site with drones. So we've done that to acquire detailed aerial imagery, and you can use a process called photogrammetry to acquire elevations from those as well. But with the nature of this site, it's heavily canopied and with dense forest cover. So it's hard to really understand the intricacies of the topography without having to look at more sophisticated instrumentation. So what we used was a UAV LiDAR. So the MDOT has actually been a really key partner and stakeholder through this process, and they've offered up their services to acquire a lot of this data as well. So the images on the right-hand side, the middle and the bottom one, those are the scatter data that you get from the LiDAR mission. So we essentially fly and map this site, and it uses ground penetrating LiDAR laser. So essentially you can shoot through the canopy of the tree to figure out where the actual topography lies, which is really key for this particular project and the nature of the site in general. Yeah, and the last thing there in terms of field investigations, we more recently performed a site walk. So there we met with Eagle representatives to walk through our initial design, just to talk with them about the feasibility of it and what our approach was to essentially start to have that conversation going into permitting. In terms of the preliminary design process, so really this is about establishing our overall objectives and design goals, and then fine-tuning those to look at different solutions, as well as looking at all the different intricacies of the site beyond just, say, the technical data. As I mentioned earlier, this is a complex site in terms of site ownership, just being a long linear section of shoreline here that's parceled into different property ownership. As you can see in that figure in the upper right, you've got a handful of private property owners as well as the county and the city. So the trailway itself runs through this on the mid slope, as I had mentioned, on a historic rail line. The city has an easement that they utilize to establish this trailway. So they're ultimately the ones that maintain the trailway through this particular section of property. But in order to do that, it requires assessing engineered solutions that extend beyond that easement. So we've talked to different property owners and held meetings with them to essentially run through some of this initial preliminary design to make sure everybody is aware of what we're proposing. And if there's any kind of feedback, we try to incorporate that into our design at an early stage. So yeah, just to, I guess, go over some of the overall goals, it's really about reestablishing this section of the Little Traverse Wheelway, as well as protecting critical infrastructure from more severe coastal bluff collapse. So some of the design goals here. So with every coastal site, there's no real code for working along the coastal environment in terms of what level of water you have to design for and wave return period interval and stuff like that. So we use a lot of special tools and knowledge and I guess professional insight to establish and balance that risk associated with what level of design you should design for. In this particular project, we're really focused on resilient adaptive solutions. So those are solutions along the lines of the cobble beach that I'd mentioned that minimize hardening of the shoreline and offer, I guess, benefits beyond just that initial coastal protection from erosion along the toe. So that's providing public access between the shoreline and the upland, as well as access for different critters to go back and forth. And then ultimately looking at other areas where we're regrading the slope, focusing on planting pallets that utilize native plants that are native to this area, as opposed to bringing in any kind of invasives or anything like that. So trying to do everything in a resilient, sustainable manner from that perspective. But then also really with a project of this nature, there's a lot of complexities. So you have to be both feasible and practical. And that is ultimately from putting together a plan that regulatory agencies will ultimately approve, but also developing plans that are realistic from a cost perspective. So not only from your initial construction costs, but your operating expenditures as well. And then just with this particular site in general, constructability has been will be a huge challenge, just given the nature of the site. It's an isolated area that's difficult to access from the water, as well as kind of right in the heart of town or just on the edge. So it's land-based access is challenging as well. So just a lot of that kind of stuff we're thinking about as we go through and put together our designs as well. Not to say that we have all the answers right now, but we're paying attention to a lot of these challenges along the way. And then also, with any project of this nature, thinking about future funding opportunities is important, because ultimately, any kind of work along the shoreline has a hefty price tag. So if there's anything you can do with your design to ultimately take advantage of grant funding opportunities by how you essentially design the project, those are kind of the things that are in our mind as well as we go through and advance this design. So with respect to the engineering analysis, I'll run through this pretty quick so we can focus on the more exciting stuff. But essentially, as I mentioned, there's two things here: coastal and then geotechnical, which I'm calling hydrogeological here, because it's more than just your traditional geotechnical, which is looking at, say, rocks and soil conditions. But it's really about groundwater issues as well and subsurface drainage. So from the coastal side of things, what we've done here is looked at putting together all kinds of statistics based on known data that we can acquire from different water level gauges and buoys throughout the lake, and essentially developing statistical average return period intervals and different things like that, so we can essentially dial in our design to a certain suitable level of design and essentially look at the performance of what we're proposing based on those various water levels. So the animation you see playing there is essentially a software package that we use called XBeach that does a really good job of modeling cobble beach transformation during storm events. And from that, we can also measure wave overtopping, which is the volume of water that splashes up over the crest of the protection. And that's really an important number, because you can tie that into its potential for erosion of the toe. But we call this a dynamic revetment, and you can see that in that video there, the dashed line is the initial placement of the cobble itself, and then the purple line is the transformation of the cobble during a significant storm event. So this is a 100-year water level with surge. So some of the rare peak water levels that you can see, and coupled with a significant storm event. So we use this to essentially look at the different elevations and placement of our cobble beach and how it will function during different storm events. But there's other models that we use to get to this level of detail where we have to transform offshore waves to nearshore conditions with a model called Mike 21. And then we also developed a storm surge model to essentially fine tune the water levels for this particular site, because some of the closest gauges that NOAA and the Army Corps maintain for water levels is where we pull our data. One is in Port Inland, Michigan, and the thought there was that storm surge measured there could be quite different than what it actually is in Little Traverse Bay. So we built up a storm surge model to essentially look at the details inside of the bay. From the hydrogeological perspective, that's really about characterizing the subsurface conditions with respect to soils, as well as groundwater movement, groundwater elevations, how precipitation functions along the shore or along the bluff itself, and what kind of impacts that can have on slope stability or instability. So there's a lot of different software packages we use to model that. And ultimately, what we do is a comparative factor of safety analysis when we start to look at proposed design conditions. And this is just an example that I'll quick run through. So the top row is all existing conditions that we assessed. So that's looking at different profiles along the shoreline and measuring their factor of safety. So factor of safety is essentially a measurement of slope stability. So at 1 or below, a slope is essentially in a state where it is prone to failure. So you use factor of safety to essentially try to elevate that factor of safety above 1 to a certain threshold to essentially, known, engineering standards with respect to factor of safety. So this is just comparing the existing versus the proposed here. So we shoot for a factor of safety of between 1.3 and 1.5. So this just shows how different proposed solutions can impact factor of safety. So right here is soil nailing, which is essentially taking large scale helical anchors on a 5x5 grid with a heavy mesh that you can seat over, but essentially nailing the soil into place. And right here, the middle one here, this just shows what regrading to a shallower slope can do in the near shore, as well as placing a cobble beach to help further buttress the toe. That goes from 0.95 up to 1.4. And then this option here looked at if we put a steel sheet pile wall in to essentially help maintain the trailway, similar to how it is in one section of the trail. It allows us to essentially have less fill below, or lakeward of the steel sheet pile wall. So there's a lot that goes into defining these or deciding these preliminary designs based on the amount of fill that we need to bring to site and different logistics like that. So that was essentially looking at how that steel sheet pile functions. And that one raised the factor of safety up to 1.4 versus 1.2 as well. So I just wanted to give a high level overview of that. So I guess now for the more exciting stuff from a visual perspective. So as I mentioned, we're around 50% design right now. The primary shoreline protection we're looking at is a dynamic revetment. So essentially that's cobble material. So smaller stone, say 2-inch diameter, all the way up to, it could be as big as a 12-inch diameter, but it's just a heavier stone material with a mix that has what we would call a D50 or an average size of 6 inches. And we place that along the toe for both reaches. And then above that, we're looking at regrading those existing slopes that are sloughing and failing, and actually lowering the trailway in certain areas. There's a couple things going on with respect to the upland area where 2 of the existing trailway collapses have taken place. I don't have contours on the upland here, but there's a large swale right adjacent to where the coastal bluff collapsed. The initial coastal bluff collapse took place in 2020. And then where this trailway is since washed out over on the west side here, there's also a large swale here with some drainage infrastructure that puts water in there. So essentially we've done a lot to assess that with respect to groundwater and seepage impacts inside of those swales, and found that it would be advantageous from a stability perspective to actually push the trailway back and fill those swales. That also helps minimize the amount of lake bed footprint that we take up, because that's just a challenge from the regulatory perspective. They would prefer to minimize lake bed footprint as much as possible. So making moves like that helps out for that. Another thing cutting the trailway in and lowering it does for us is we can acquire fill on site as opposed to shipping soils in for the purpose of regrading. We'll ultimately have to bring some topsoil in, but we can do a lot of the major grading elements by just cut and fill and balancing that on the site, which ultimately helps reduce the overall construction cost. I had mentioned soil nailing. So the main area that we're looking at soil nailing is upland of the 2020 failure area. And I've got some imagery of that that'll help, I guess, better explain and show what we have here for the soil nailing. Another key element for that area is a bridge structure. So we've looked at, as opposed to filling that back in, how we could essentially use a prefabricated bridge to provide an interesting architectural element to the trailway, as well as minimizing the amount of fill that we need to bring into the site, and just also looking at how that helps us out with respect to slope stability in terms of bridging that gap as opposed to filling it in. Drainage is also mentioned. So there's a handful of drainage networks and pipes that are proposed that you don't see on this plan, but ultimately doing everything we can to desaturate the slope and control and channel stormwater off of the site, as opposed to letting it seep into the site or erode off of the site. So the next couple slides here have some renderings of the proposed conditions here to help people better kind of visualize what we're showing in plan view. So the large image here is the proposed concept. So this has the cobble beach along the shoreline, a regraded trailway, or sorry, a regraded lower slope that goes up to a steel sheet pile wall. So then we would have a handrail similar to the existing that would run the length of the trailway through this area. And then you can see from these images, this is the existing, that's where you're looking at here in the direction of this perspective. And then this is just a typical section through this area. This is an area that I'd mentioned with the swales where we're regrading the trailway down. So it's a gradual regrade. So we push it down at a 5% max slope. And then it has a large vertical curve, so it doesn't come down too abruptly in the middle here, and it pushes it back from its existing position now towards the bluff and fills in that swale area. So by lowering it through here and pushing it back, we were actually able to acquire everything we need for the most part for cut and fill in this western reach of the site right here. And essentially the grading for the proposed solution here stops or kind of comes to an end at the end of this existing swale here. However, the cobble beach does extend a bit further. This is a perspective looking through what we were looking at, the coastal collapse that took place in 2020 and the bridge element that I had mentioned. So yeah, again, pushing it back here to fill in that swale and putting this bridge here. We've got some additional fill along an existing wall right here to help further buttress that. That wall did continue further this way when this section of shoreline collapsed in 2020. So there's some remnants of that you can see from different photos and being on site there. So what we're trying to do is help further stabilize that, as well as stabilize our bridge abutment here by bringing in some fill material there. Essentially creating an interesting channel through here where we again take advantage of native plant species and communities. So this is supposed to be more than just a bridge over this gap. I think it could be a really interesting architectural piece as well. Potentially, there is existing shoreline access that you don't see in this rendering behind these trees right here. This is all city property through here. So any kind of existing access down to the shoreline, we would maintain and potentially improve upon that as well through this regrading process. This is also a really important area from a constructability standpoint. So if we utilized Magnus Park as a laydown area for construction, this whole regrading process will serve as a key element through the sequencing of construction to essentially bring material down to the shoreline here, and could play a key part in that overall construction process. This is the last perspective image I have here. So this is just looking at this bridge area from another perspective. You can see here we regraded and reestablished vegetation up in the existing area that is currently has a lot of remnants from the coastal collapse in terms of downed trees as well as exposed soils there. So I had mentioned that this is the area that we would be using soil nailing. So those of you that are unfamiliar with that, this is a detail, a section of a soil nail. So essentially you have a large helical anchor that goes in, and then you have this anchored mesh that would be placed along this whole area, and you'd have a series of anchors, say every 5 feet or spaced on a 5-foot grid. And you could hydroseed that and establish vegetation over that to essentially hide that engineered piece over time. In terms of establishing vegetation, that's been another thing that's on our mind and or at the front of our mind during this whole process, knowing that this is a remote site. It's a lot to maintain. So trying to effectively use that in when we're selecting plant communities and thinking about maintenance over time, how can we do this to have the least amount of maintenance possible, but knowing that every site requires some bit of maintenance. So I just wanted to mention that because I do realize that this is a remote spot and it's going to have its challenges when it comes to establishing and maintaining things like vegetation through this area. So I guess last but not least here, I just wanted to touch base on where we're at with respect to the cost estimate. So the opinion of probable construction costs. So we've completed our 50% design estimate, which we would call a class 2 estimate. So there's different classes for cost estimate and they get more accurate with the lower class. So right now the class 2 is approximately plus or minus 15 to 20% in terms of where we're at. A lot of that has to do with, I guess, many different factors from constructability to changing markets. It's not necessarily a whole lot of unknowns with respect to design. It's kind of market factors and things like that. And I guess different logistics that play into that. So right now we're at 20 million for the entirety of the site, right around or approximately 20 million, and 75% of that cost is the cobble. So the cobble is challenged with respect to the amount of volume that you need to bring to site. So there's a lot of things we're looking at there with respect to logistics. Can you bring it by marine, or is it something that you have to truck in? Just timing, site access, the seasonality of both quarrying stone, shipping stone, all of that are things that we're playing into our construction logistics plan. But right now it's looking at around 100,000 tons of cobble would be brought to site between these two reaches. So yeah, we've visited quarries in the region to look at different sources of cobble. So we've identified a couple that are both, one of them is a natural stone quarry. So we found a quarry in Ontario and visited that, which was an interesting visit. The quarry operator there actually, he was in Petoskey on a bike trip to ride the Little Traverse Wheelway the week before. So I found that interesting. When I was in Canada, people knew about this trailway here. And then the other area we're looking at is in Alpena, Michigan. So that's more of a quarried limestone for this type of stone. So yeah, a lot has gone in to get us where we're at, but the next steps here, we're in the process of refining the design. So looking at what we can do to adjust the level of detail for the cobble beach along the site. So that's looking at if we can lower the crest elevation and reduce the volumes for certain areas. So taking a more detailed approach at our cobble beach modeling. Ultimately, we're going to be submitting for permits soon and putting together a bid package with the final design. That's kind of our ultimate deliverable. And then also throughout the duration of the project, we're always keeping an eye on grants and funding opportunities for the next phase of this particular project. So I hope I didn't take up too much time there, but with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to you guys. And I'm not sure if you want to have questions now or a discussion, but I'll turn it back over to you.
I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, so I'll turn it over to council first. Do you have questions, comments? Mr. Shields?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Rory. I think a lot of questions, but maybe the best question right now is, this is a cost estimate. What do we have a timeline estimate or something to tell? Everybody's curious about this project, where things will go next, and what can we expect in the future as far as timing?
Okay. I can tell you what I know from my perspective is in terms of our deliverable. In terms of when construction would go forward, there's a lot of, I guess, additional work that needs to get done before I think a realistic date can be put on that. We have taken our cost estimates and escalated those to 2026, thinking that that is the soonest that construction can go forward based on finishing up this particular final design and getting the project ready for bid, as well as securing all the permits. So if everything was approved in that sense, I think the soonest you could construct anything would be 2026, either the fall or the spring.
That's if the money is garnished, is that correct?
Yeah, and that doesn't, that's assuming you have all the money in place and doesn't factor in additional funding timelines.
Yeah. Very good. Mr. Moore?
Thank you for your presentation. It was to a degree overwhelming. In some parts, I wasn't sure I was listening to a foreign language, but you did a good job. My question is this. Have you made any projections or assessments of the likelihood that this dynamic design will be able to survive the vagaries of water, wind, climate change, et cetera, moving forward? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the modeling that I had mentioned there, so we look at this from a numerical modeling perspective. The Baird is a company of coastal scientists, so we write different numerical models and have access to all the publicly available models. So the tools that we are using to assess this from a desktop perspective or with a computer perspective, are what we believe are the right tools for the job and the best tools available. However, we also have practical experience with respect to these kind of projects. So constructing projects like this throughout different parts of the world. Every site is unique, but looking at what we've done here, and we've used the 100-year water level as our basis for design. Typically the Corps, their old standards were that you would use a 20-year water level. So a lower water level combined with a 10-year storm, or a 10-year water level combined with a 20-year storm. So we are taking a more conservative approach right off the bat using the 100-year water level.
What is the height, or what is the increase in water levels when you're looking at 100 years? Is that we've dropped roughly what, 3 feet or more in the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years? Are we looking at what's the preparation for that number?
There's a lot of ongoing study with respect to climate change impacts on water levels. A lot of it has to do with what climate model you use and assess. So there's kind of wildly different estimates of what climate change could do on the Great Lakes, but the general consensus that we've found is that it may not necessarily be that you equate to significantly higher highs and lower lows, but more frequent durations between the two. And almost more importantly is during the winter months when you have your more extreme winds from the northwest for this site in particular, just kind of a warming climate in the Great Lakes region would lead to less ice cover along the shore, which provides significant advantage for, well, not that doesn't provide an advantage, but that ice, that shore fast ice does ultimately provide a buffer along shorelines. So that's just something to think about with respect to climate change, is that it might not so much be whether you have a high lake level here or there, but just though during those extreme periods of the year, like the winter time, when you do have the larger blows coming from the northwest and not having that ice cover.
If Lake Michigan was up 5 or 6 or 8 feet from where it is now, would this design protect the trail?
So right now the lake level is around 580, I believe. I'm just going to jump back to the slide. So we've looked at a statistical analysis over using, I want to say, around 100 years of water level data. And we've added surge on top of that. So the 100-year water level, which has a 1% probability of occurrence over a year, is 584.43. So I just mentioned that because when you start to think about today's water level and add on just an incremental value up to say like 8 feet, that could be quite unrealistic. So I mentioned that because 584 is where we're designing everything for, and that is an extreme water level in this particular case. And that this design is designed to function for that particular water level. With this model that we do have, we could look at more extreme water levels and get the overtopping volumes and essentially assess what that could mean. Is that helpful?
Looking to water up about 3 or 4 feet when all of the slough off started.
Sorry, is that was that a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, no, so it was around record high water levels. I thought I had a graphic in here of the Great Lakes water levels over time, but I think I pulled it out right before I brought this presentation together. So, but either way, so the water levels during the period of high lake levels were around this 582.6. So kind of like there's 2 different things you look at here when you assess water levels from a coastal perspective is what's the still water level, and then what's that water level with storm surge added into that. So essentially what we've done here is looked at, we essentially are assessing what the water level was back in 2020 by using our 100-year water level. And that's the baseline that we are designing for.
Another question. Is there more damage to the west of where we are looking at repairs now? Is that going to need to be addressed in the future?
To the west, like beyond, like over
along the shoreline?
We've focused on the entirety of, I guess, when you say west, do you mean beyond this point here, over towards the neighboring park, so East Park?
Yeah.
I've focused on our project extents here, and I haven't given East Park much thought.
Okay.
But something we could, next time I'm on site, I could definitely take a look over there and see it. There's a few things you could look at and get a general idea of what your level of risk and threat is. Okay.
You also mentioned possibly moving the trail back a little bit, correct?
Yep.
And do we have the right of way to do that? I think when we have a 20-foot easement through there?
You do, yeah. So it's a 20-foot easement, but essentially the areas where we're regrading here and it's moving it back. The actual footprint of the trailway may be within 20 feet of the existing trailway. However, by filling in these swales, there's a lot of work that's happening outside of that easement and as well as along the shoreline and everything like that. So that would be a key piece to get everything to go forward to, is to essentially re-establish easements and essentially make sure that any property owner along this reach is on board with the proposed design. And so that whole process, I think, is a whole nother level of, I don't want to say complexity, but due process that would have to happen before anything could go forward on this.
Right. And, okay, so there are easements that would have to be addressed with landowners, the county, et cetera.
Yep, that's correct.
Mr. Moore.
So just kind of following up this 100-year historical water level, you're looking at that literally historically going back, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, so when you're looking at sustainability or durability projections for this model, do those accommodate climate change going forward? And if so, how do you do that? Thank you.
Yeah, so the beauty of the dynamic revetment is that it does adjust to the storm condition. And if you had seen in this animation here, I'll just blow this up again, is the way that the cobble beach can reshape and build the berm up, and essentially some of these designs that we've run at lower elevations, I do have animations of those, but I don't have them in this presentation. They essentially push the entire cobble up along the shoreline and build it up to, you lose sort of your beach plan form, but you do acquire protection from that. So that nature of being able to essentially reshape and then having that slope as your backdrop for this shape, meaning that it's not going to blow over a coastal barrier or something and then essentially be lost in an upland area. It does provide a bit of flexibility for more extreme conditions and different stuff like that. So yes, we've given a lot of thought with that. And I think the biggest thing with respect to climate change would be that this has a dynamic nature to it. It will reshape naturally, but ultimately using that 100-year water level, so your historic highs, to essentially design your, that is our design elevation, meaning that we measure water that breaches this structure during a significant storm event at 100-year water level, and maintain or make sure that volume is below a certain threshold that can cause erosion. So essentially, we're taking a much more conservative approach to our design than you would for, say, a typical structure like a revetment. I hope that's helpful.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you. Thank you, Rory, for your presentation. I want to take a step back and go back to the investigation stage. So if we could just go backwards a little bit. When I see the eventual, there was sloughing happening over the duration of early 2020, which led eventually to that coastal collapse. But when I see fallen trees, which means that these trees were already holding on to the soil that was present there, when I see the sloughing of trees and the eventual collapse of that shoreline, that leads me to believe that this is more about a rain inundation event or a series of events. And so how far upriver did you go, considering the topographic nature of that exact point of where the sloughing of the trees happened? Because if those trees are falling in over the bike path, then that means to me that the soils were saturated with water, and that's part of a large precipitation event over the duration of many months. That would lead me to believe that that's why those trees were unable to retain that soil, and then they lost it when the sloughing happened towards the lake, or the coastal collapse happened. And so I'm just wondering, how far did we go back looking at rainfall and also upriver? So how far like Epler Road and up that topography, did you go looking back in history?
Yeah, no, this is a great question and a great observation. Because you're very much right. Groundwater can play a very important, I don't know if important is the right word, but a detrimental role in the stability of structure or shoreline bluffs, coastal bluffs like this. So we looked at regional rainfall from a climatic perspective. So looking at average rainfalls, peak rainfalls, and dialing that into our slope stability modeling. Also, when we did these borings, we essentially had somebody on site that visually assessed every 4-foot increment of coring that they pulled out with this boring. So the purpose of that was to look for clay veins. So when you have groundwater that's perched in these kind of conditions, it typically follows a clay layer, and that's where you'll see it breach out the side of the bluff. So we looked for clay veins to identify where we should place our water level monitoring instrumentation. So those were put at different elevations throughout the actual boring. So the borings went into the ground about 100 feet, and then we put 3 of these, we call them VPWs, they're vibrating wire piezometers, and essentially they're pressure gauges that can identify where water is seeping throughout the profile of that bluff. So we put those in at the toe of the bluff. We have them at the top of the bluff. We don't have any upland borings further than this. However, you can, between those observations that we made, you're able to identify where the most likely path would be for groundwater in terms of how it would move through this area. So yeah. In terms of the makeup of these bluffs, so I'm just going to switch to another slide that right here. So these colors indicate different characteristics of soil types. The bluffs are largely made up of native sand materials. When you get lower, it becomes more dense. So essentially when they go through and do these borings, they'll pound a hammer down and from those blow counts and these observations, we can identify what types of soils. We do different lab testings to look at more scientific details and information with respect to the subsurface conditions, what we would call the soil stratigraphy. But I guess the main thing that we observed here was, yes, groundwater does play a key part. And you can see this is where we recorded groundwater throughout the duration of the project thus far. And we've adjusted that based on highs and lows and the precipitation events with a model. And essentially before this collapsed, there was a large swale behind that area. And the groundwater plume just happened to follow the essentially bottom of that swale. So that area was oversaturated likely, and being that it was in April, I think it was on the 20th or somewhere, or the 19th, right around there when it collapsed. And it essentially is a combination of, yes, there was a huge northwesterly blow that day, and it was at your peak water levels, or your historically high water levels. So you were getting a lot of wave action on the toe. That erosion played a part. I mean, that's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on the day that the coastal bluff collapsed, but you also did have a highly saturated environment. So what we're looking at doing is filling these in, capturing and draining out groundwater as we go and fill these in by putting subsurface drain tiling and different things like that to help minimize the amount of saturation along the face and the toe of the bluff. But then ultimately buttressing that. So yeah, it's not that we didn't look beyond the site. The data that we do have for groundwater primarily comes from the borings and the groundwater monitoring instrumentation we have. But we can make assumptions from those to adjust groundwater in our modeling to see if you did have like a dramatic rise or increase in groundwater, what that does to the overall stability. So I hope that's helpful.
That's helpful. I have another question, Mayor, if I may step right in that. Okay. So considering that it was kind of limited at just looking at the site itself, the point I am trying to make is there was a massive deforestation project that happened in 2019 on a variety of like public related lands, both the Greenwood Cemetery deforestation project that happened there in combination with what Emmett County was doing at the fairgrounds. And this is both off of Epler Road. And historically, that Epler Road is, the topography is quite high, or the elevation increases as you go to the south. And then you can almost see, it's almost like a channel of like water if you're in a high inundation or high precipitation event. The water falling down and coming down Epler Road. And normally on the east side of Epler Road, those large rain inundations would have been absorbed by the porous nature and the greenery, or the trees in that case, some pretty older trees that were retaining the soil and absorbing that moisture into and percolating it into the groundwater system. But when you have like a massive deforestation event, and then you're like filling ravines with trees in the interim because you don't want to manage the wood waste and debris because of the cost to do so, I really believe that there was a series of events that both impacted the way that the water was sent towards the shoreline down Epler Road and conveyed down to where this area where the groundwater was then saturated. And it was a combination of high shoreline and high wave force and saturated groundwater that caused the event. So can we pinpoint the why this happened? And is that discovered in the research? And then my question becomes, okay, why did this happen? So it was a series of events from what I'm understanding. And then the question becomes like, I also have a question about who is responsible for that. So in your investigations, which I really appreciate you documenting that, like, let's start at the very beginning. And the Miracle Mile was constructed in 2009. So was part of the investigation the binding contracts with who funded the wheelway at that juncture and who was responsible over a 10, 20, 30, 40 year period of the maintenance of that wheelway? Because I feel like the city of Petoskey and our residents have been unduly burdened with shouldering the responsibility of not only this study, but moving this whole thing forward. And I find that I don't think that's fair, and I don't think it's equitable. So I'm wanting to know if somebody did the research on this document in 2009. Emmett County at the time, with Lynn Johnson as our administrator for 30 years, facilitated this money coming through our region. And I want to know, like, why are we shouldering all of this? And what kind of research has been done legally going through those binding documents? Because I know it was a multi-million-dollar and multi-year project. So I guess I'm wondering, like, whose responsibility it is to do the research and follow the money and follow the flow of both water and funds to create this, the situation we have now, but initially this amazing bike path that we have, and it's so important to our economy. So that's a multi-layer question, Roy.
Yeah, no, I kind of see where you're going with it. The thing I would say is to, before you like totally commit yourself to thinking that deforestation project led to the failure, you have to look at the site as a whole. I don't want to say you have to look at the site as a whole. I think the slide I have in front of me here, so if you look at this existing picture, you have an area that's further away from that area on Epler Road that was basically where the forest was cut down or the trees were removed and stuff like that. So it's not that I would say that maybe did or did not have an impact here, but based on what we're seeing from the data is that the initial trailway was basically a rail to trail conversion. So essentially they took what they had and converted it to an asphalt path. There wasn't any coastal protection added or anything like that. The trailway was constructed in 2009. You had a record period of low lake levels during the, say, 2009 to 2015-ish, and then it shot up to record high lake levels from, say, 2018 to 20. that's when all of your damage happened. You also had a period during that, to make those lake levels go up, like you have to have a lot of precipitation. I think the 5 years that you had prior to that, we had more rainfall precipitation recorded in the Great Lakes Basin. I think it was a record 5-year rainfall record for it. So that's why you have essentially the Great Lakes react to the amount of rainfall in the basin in terms of the water level. So, it's hard to say that particular project would have been the catalyst for this. I think, the trailway got installed. The existing slopes of the lower bluff here that are sloughing off, like that doesn't have anything to do with what happened on Epler Road. That's just the nature of the fact that the toe was beat up during high lake levels. It was already oversteepened. It's just the sand structure that make these soils up is when you get oversteepened, that factor of safety I'd mentioned earlier, like these things were likely already at or below 1 when the trailway was put into place. I don't know that for certain, but it's just with the nature of how it's reacted after having a little bit of toe damage. So, I guess I would caution you to have any major conclusions that one particular project led to the demise of the trailway through this section here. That's the only thing I say there based on like not all of our, but the vast majority of our initial investigation went into that area right where that coastal bluff happened. So MDOT installed 2 groundwater monitoring devices right after that happened. And then we put more both on the upland and lower portion of the trailway. So we have a lot of really good data for that area. Plus those observations when we did the borings and essentially the very few veins of clay that we were able to find through that, and then ultimately the groundwater paths through there, there wasn't any significant indication that there was just a major thoroughfare for groundwater to be perched and breached out through this slope. Like it fluctuates and goes naturally down to the lake as you would typically see water moving through a sandy environment. So when you have clay layers that are perched, you get elevated water tables, and those can essentially be big drivers with respect to slope instability based on groundwater. Granted, I'm not our geotechnical engineer on this project. I'm the project manager, so I can speak to it. The geotechnical engineers are the ones that are really digging into the details with respect to the data and the ones that are on site with the appropriate education and background to really dissect that data. Here's the PM articulating what we found out.
Thank you.
We're not making any decisions tonight. This is just a presentation by Rory Agnew of a summation of it all. There are years ahead before. So, council, anything else? Normally, I don't have public speak unless there's a motion, but if you wish to speak, please come forward, your full name, your full address, and you can address city council, not the audience, you address city council. Is there anyone who wishes to speak at this time? Sir, Mr. Boland.
Council, my name is Brent Boland. I'm the Executive Director of the Top Michigan Trails Council, located at 1687 M119, and I am a resident of the city in Ward 1. I just want to say, I believe you have a letter from the Trails Council, from the Board of Directors, just expressing our gratitude at getting to this point in partnership with the city, and commending the city staff on their leadership in getting us to this point. A number of our board members are here tonight because they wanted to hear directly from Rory, who always does a nice job with these presentations. So thank you, Rory. And we just wanted to say that, as always, we're here to continue our partnership with you, continue moving this forward. But I really can't emphasize enough to you how often I get asked, when's the trail going to get fixed? So I think that Shane and Kendall will probably go nuts if they got half the calls we do. But it's okay because that's our job. That's what we're here for. But there really is a clamoring for progress. And so I think it's very exciting. We've had this presentation tonight. We have some idea of what it's going to take to get this done. So I'm very encouraged by all of that and the possibilities we have moving forward. And I don't know if there's any questions for the Trail Council, but I just wanted to say on behalf of our board of directors and members, thank you.
Thank you. It's going to be a massive lift, not just for the city, the Trails Council, but the county is going to have to be involved with this. Bay Harbor is going to have to be involved. Many individuals are going to have to be involved along with grant writing. So we look forward to moving forward, all of us. Thank you. Rory, are you still there, Rory?
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak to council at this time? Rory, I want to say from council and from myself, thank you very much for this presentation. I know you guys have worked long and hard on this, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to move this forward and put this back as this miracle mile that we really need up here for Petoskey. Thank you again, Rory.
Well, thank you and thank all of you for having us.
Let's sit on this prize at this point. Now we'll move to consent agenda. It's the October 7th, 2024 regular session city council meeting minutes. Acknowledge the receipt of a report concerning certain administrative transactions that have occurred since October 7th, 2024. The September 24, 2024 revenue and expenditure report. Also authorizing a contract with Dross Landscaping for tree and stump removal services. Authorize a contract with Straight Up Tree Services LLC for brush and limb chipping and disposal, as well as lastly authorize contract with Dunkel Excavating Services for snowplow services. Do you have any questions on that? Mr. Moore.
Okay, I have a couple questions, probably for Mr. Robbins. On the brush and limb chipping and disposal contract, it looks like we are going with someone different than we did last year. And I just wanted to check and see if we had references on this new provider. You want me to give you the other question at the same time?
Sure. Well,
That's
fine.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and then the next one's the snow plowing service contract. And it looked like we only had a single bidder and it looked like it was double or close to double the cost of last year. So that's my other question. Thank
Okay,
you.
I can touch bases on both of those.
Please.
We did receive a bid from a company out of Maple City, which is outside of our region, obviously. So we were concerned about that when we did open the bids, but we reached out to Straight Up Tree Service. He came north, we interviewed him. He does work in the area. In fact, he was working in Walloon Lake. He's worked in the region, Harbor Springs, Charlevoix. He does have good equipment. We did reach out to the village of Kopnish, who he has worked for in the past and had high reviews. It's not a chipping contract in Kopnish, but he did work for the village. So with that being said, we did go over the schedule with the city, that it is going to be a per hour contract, that he will be paid when he hits the city gate to start the work, and the contract stops when he leaves. So if it goes into 2 or 3 days, like our typical brush chipping can do, he is well aware of that and is satisfied with his bid. So we will move forward with your approval.
The other question?
The other question in regards to the snow plowing contract, there's a lot to this contract as far as locations. There's 18 locations throughout the city that we use this plowing service for. We did add some areas to this contract, hence the reason for the increase. So the one common in the whole contract is the parking lots. We did have areas that we picked up on Washington Street, Liberty Street. It's kind of these bump out parking areas that the underbody plows don't really get into and clean. So we've been using the Dunkel service to do this. So we've added a few locations, changed a couple things around, But essentially for the parking lot side of it, it's about a 30% increase. So I would say in general, that's probably more in line than, looking at a double.
Thank you.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mike Robbins.
Mhm.
I did have a question about the plowing as well. Do you think that some of the increase per snow event of more than 1.5 inches has to do with the fact that over the past 2 years, we really haven't had that much snow? So how to bid on something knowing that you might not really have many opportunities where it's an inch and a half or more? Did that play into the pricing in addition to adding additional lots?
Yeah, this, Dunkel Excavating, does a lot of work in the region, and, they looked at this and they've actually had this contract for the last 6 years. And, Tri-County Excavating had it prior to the 6 years, only for the 3. And Dunkel, with what we rearranged with him, without having a price increase in virtually 6 years, he priced it out based on today's markets and what we've added to the project. So very comfortable with that bid, and with the equipment that they use, it goes fairly quick for what they do. So.
And then I do have another question. Maybe
Please,
the second part. So in terms of the brush and limb chipping and disposal,
Yep.
as well as the tree and stump removal service contract, those are 2 different contracts, and they're
Yep.
2 different services. So the one that you would propose to give to the straight up tree service out of Leelanau County, they would be the ones that would be providing like the pull behind chipper, and they would be providing the residential curbside service.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, so for the chipping service, they're charging $95 an hour. That's their rate. And then the hauling would be, where will the material go?
That is up to the owner to find out where he's gonna put that.
Okay.
And when we questioned him about if he had any contacts at this time, he has not set that up yet, because the contract actually starts in January. The bulk of it in April, but if we get a windstorm or we need him, he'll be obligated to respond. But he says he typically deals with local farmers, and they'll disperse of the wood chips through their facilities.
Okay. So that would be like a source of carbon for farmers to add to like their manure or some kind of mix like that, or like some kind of soil
Yeah.
building or disposal. Okay.
Yep.
And then for the Dross landscape portion of that,
Mhm.
this would be contracting as needed if we had like a major storm or tree falling.
Yeah, we have a tree removal program. So we go around the city and look at different trees, respond to homeowners that may have concerns. And it's an as-needed contract because we don't guarantee them 1 tree a year. It's only as needed.
As needed, okay.
So,
And then they are also as the bidder, and I believe they've been doing this for quite some time, yes? So they, as the bidder, that it's also written into the contract that they're responsible for the eventual disposal of said tree once it's taken down.
that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that answered both my questions. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Shields.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Support.
I have a motion from Mr. Shields, a second from Mr. Moore. I go to Ms. Beck for roll.
Moore. Aye. Shields.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. This is your chance for public comment. I asked it if you have a comment that is related to something that's on the agenda. I ask that you hold it so that you can be a participant in this discussion if that's what you wish. If you cannot, I will entertain your ability to come up and speak on one of those items in the future agenda here tonight. Anyone wish to address council with public comment? There being none, we'll move on. City manager's update. For that, I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Horn.
Thank you, Mayor. A few quick updates for City Council and residents. So just as a reminder, November 5th general election is nigh, if you will. It's coming up. I don't think we can think we've all know about this. We hear about it many times throughout the day. I know my mailings at home have yes, filling that. Yes. So just as a reminder, early voting will begin starting on Saturday, October 26th. Again, this will be at the VFW Post 2051 in Harbor Springs. So early voting begins on the second Saturday prior to an election. So again, that's October 26th and ends the Sunday before the election, which this year would be November 3rd. So during that time period, that site will be open from 8:30 to 4:30 each day, including weekends. So we encourage obviously people to get out and take advantage of that early voting opportunity. Just want to update council as well on where we currently stand with AV ballots. So to date, as of Sarah ran a report about 4 o'clock this afternoon, we have issued 1,649 AV ballots. We've received back 916 for about almost 56% return rate. So obviously that number is probably different now than what we checked it at before. So we're constantly getting those in. But I just wanted to get council a current update on where that was at. I also provided you a kind of our current third quarter, if you will, code enforcement officer totals for you to take a look at. So this is kind of continues to track kind of the same way. Sign violations are our number one code issue that we experience. And then miscellaneous is kind of a catch-all, but it involves a lot of different things. We will be coming back to council here over when things we can catch our breath after the budget likely is coming back to you with a camping ordinance. You may have experienced or gotten some complaints about illegal camping going on along the bayfront. I think when I pulled in this morning at 7:30, there was a camper van that had their blinds down. So we saw that a lot this summer. So we're going to come back to city council and address that with some ordinances that from going forward. So that's the current update from a code enforcement standpoint. Few other things we wanted to highlight was we did have our tunnel mural ribbon cutting. I believe we ended up having 9 out of our 10 art commission members were present, which was great to see everybody come out. The artist, Kevin Burdick, is kind of next to the mayor there with the scissors in his hand. Just a very talented man. If you didn't get a chance to talk to him, he was here. Very passionate about what he does, and I think he talked to pretty much everybody that would walk through the tunnel. He would stop and engage with them as he was working. So a few other quick updates. Downtown trick or treat is this Saturday. That's going to be line up at Central Elementary School beginning about 9:45 a.m. on Saturday. It'll start at 10. Going from Central Elementary down Howard Street to Pennsylvania Park. We will have downtown streets closed to just foot traffic during this for the safety of the trick-or-treaters. Again, that's this Saturday from 10 to noon. And then our residential trick-or-treat will obviously be on the 31st of October from 6 to 8 p.m. We will continue to have East Mitchell Street closed from Kalamazoo to Woodland. And we'll have public safety personnel providing extra patrols during this period as well. Wanted to provide a few pictures of projects that have been completed. Really thanks to Kendall and Director Carr for facilitating this. This is the vehicle exhaust extraction system that has been installed in both stations. So now we can certainly today we enjoy having the doors open, but in February it's not so enjoyable to exercise our equipment that with the doors open. So this provides us a safe way to do so in the winter months. So thank you for your support in allowing us to move that project forward. as well as the resurfacing, we continued resurfacing, the wheelway. So this kind of picked up where we left off in 22. You might have remembered last year, we had some significant failures around the tunnel area, if you will. So we kind of skipped forward a little bit. So we went back and picked up where we left off. So this gets us about 300 feet. Is Kendall back there? No, about 300 feet from the preserve entrance. So we're kind of moving that direction, if you will. Any questions for me?
My compliments to you, to code enforcer, for all the work he does. I know he, along with all public safety, that we have great support for the city and for the people. But also, I think this is really nice that it lets people know we have stuff that we're working on at all times. And I think when citizens at times complain about government, this is a prime example of something that was initiated about 2 years ago. People wanting to code enforcement, complaining about everything that you see here, from disabled vehicles, licensing, short sign violations, etc. Thank you for you guys to support us funding his position, and for Shane making a great hire on this gentleman, because he's done a great job.
Yeah, honestly, I was a little concerned that when we initially put it out there, do we have enough work for him? But obviously, as you can see, we're busy with opportunities to address blight and property maintenance code issues. I do want to give a little kudo to the county, Emmett County. We had a meeting with their building officials last week, I believe it was. And really, I just appreciate the opportunity to collaborate. And when we see something, we'll reach out to them and vice versa. So I think for the first time, in maybe a long time, we're really developing a good collaborative relationship where we're looking to, again, hold property owners accountable appropriately for deficiencies. And then by combining our efforts, I think that makes us stronger if we need to take that next step into the courts. So kudos to the county for again, that partnership, and we look forward to continuing to build on that going forward.
Thank you for doing that. Anyone else wish to speak? Ms. Walker?
Yes, Mayor, thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you, Shane, for your update and your report. I did want to ask, in terms of the 2024 code enforcement officer totals, so sign violations and that being proportionately the largest amount of enforcement issues, is that coming from the commercial sector and the fact that we have a sign committee within the planning and within the downtown management board? Are signs almost exclusively commercial?
That's a good question. I'd have to dive into that a little bit more. I think it's signs that have been illegally placed, whether they're in the right of way, whether they're put on a telephone pole.
You mean like garage sale signs?
Some of it's that, some of it's real estate signs. Some of it is a business that puts a sign in a spot or in a location that's not appropriate. So we get calls on those quite a bit as well. So it's various infractions, if you will. I'd have to do a little deeper dive to figure out how much is commercial and how much is coming from other areas, but.
Okay, and then my second question, if I may, Mayor.
Please.
And so you had mentioned the kind of the reinforcement of the public relationship between the county building and the county building and zoning team. And I know that in my neighborhood, we are still faced with a pretty serious blight situation. And the irony for us is this blight on Emmett Street is located smack dab in the middle of where these multi-million-dollar investments are happening, both at the Lossett Lumber Square to the north and Michigan Maple Block to the south, and right in the middle middle, we have a former, planning commission member that has two abandoned and vacant houses that are really unsafe, and it's been through the court system, and yet here we are still with the same kind of blight. And so it's feeling very, my neighbors are feeling pretty disempowered at this juncture, and they're like, well, what's happening? And where's the movement? And why are we not seeing any results of like the legal process move forward? So I guess maybe, I don't know if it would be appropriate for me to have a follow-up call with kind of where we're at in that juncture. And then that's also building upon both Emmett County and the city of Petoskey enforcement are going to be addressing that for not 444, 443.
Yeah, 441 to 445.
East Mitchell Street, and they're going into the courtroom together as well. And this being a commercial property versus and downtown in the central business district being, as opposed to being like in a residential neighborhood in the fourth ward. I guess I'm just wondering like how we say that relationship is getting better, but I just wonder, how I can provide any kind of like update or resolve to our current situation that we've been faced with on Emmett Street for the past 3 years.
Yeah, we're going as fast as the court system allows us to go. And so we'll continue to get that in front of them. There's many different, and we get frustrated with all the different steps that we have to take, because we have to make sure that an owner is given, due process and giving the opportunity, even though the likelihood of anything happening over that 30-60 day window that they're given is not very high, but we still have to go through that process and make sure we're checking all those boxes, because the last thing we want to do is end up having something reversed in court because we didn't give this notice or didn't provide that time frame for that change to occur. So we're well aware of those issues and that property in particular. I will need to check to see where the next step is on that one. But yeah, it's been a long process and it's unfortunate.
Thank you.
Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor. I wonder if this is something we could have a work session on. We've talked a little bit about it in the past, but on the options we have for dealing with vacant buildings, whether it be residential or commercial. Talked about various carrots, but also some potential sticks, like a vacant building registry. What if that's something we could, if a work session is the best way to address that?
Yeah, certainly I can put a discussion item on. I can give you some draft ordinances that other communities have considered. So certainly we can have that discussion and see where the appetite is of city council to proceed.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, just in follow up to that, Mr. Shields. A while ago, I got from a colleague in Grosse Pointe, the mayor of Grosse Pointe. They actually have a policy that they've been using quite effectively. And I know, Shane, you have that. That could be a part of those discussions.
Can I ask another question, Mayor?
Walker.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So do you think that those conversations would happen after we've hired an attorney for the city of Petoskey, or before that, or could that be something that we kind of build into future contract language, or like relationships we want to strengthen with our legal counsel moving forward? Do you have any sense of like if it would happen maybe before?
We have legal counsel now. We are not without legal counsel. We have legal counsel right now. So it isn't that we are, because we're looking does not mean that we have terminated our relationship with Plunkett and Cooney.
Okay, so what you're saying is like it could happen before then with current legal counsel, or it could happen post with future legal counsel.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Anything else, counsel? Okay, we'll move right on. Old business before the new business. This page first. Second reading, possible adoption of a proposed ordinance amending Chapter 15, short-term rentals regarding licensing.
So I did ask Rhonda to join again, for any follow-up questions as we continue to walk through, the licensing, short-term rental ordinance changes. I did put in the packet, just so you're not confused, there's the first, looks like page 45 starts a clean copy, as of today, based on feedback that we received, up until this meeting. And then the starting on page 53 is the marked up version from our last meeting. Just didn't want anybody to get confused on what you're looking at, just so you had a clean version and then kind of a working version, if you will. So questions, this would be a time for questions for Rhonda, or any further clarification.
Mr. Moore.
So I'll begin with what I've changed my mind on. Because that's good, right? Informed change of mind. I had been advocating to change to 60 days, less than 60, instead of less than 30. And having done some research and also talked with Ms. Stowers, I think that is not a good idea because it could impact month-to-month workforce housing. So I withdraw that suggestion. But when I went back and looked at this, I had two areas of concern in the licensing portion. And those had to do with hotel, motel, and short-term rental definitions. You'll also recall that I suggested we have this add about a definition of grandfathered properties, which Ms. Stowers did, and that looks good to me. But looking at the hotel and motel sections, I'll start with this. As between the definition of a hotel and a short-term rental, I did not think.
Look, just direct people on where you're at.
Okay.
Which page?
Yep, I will give it to you. So this would be on page 46, the definition of hotel, and 47, the definition of short-term rental.
Which is on page
47. Next page. These are the definitions. So if you take a moment and read those, hotel, any building, structure, part thereof, which is used primarily for paid public lodging on a transient basis in which access to and from each room or unit is through an interior door. Okay. Now look at what it says for short-term rental. The making of an occupancy available for any dwelling unit or portion thereof for a fee or other compensation for a term of less than 30 consecutive days, which by the way, hotel says too, including but not including bed and breakfast, etc. The point being, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, do we not have short-term rentals that have interior doors where access to the units are through interior doors?
I mean, offhand, I can't answer that. I mean, most of them go through the front door. There's an exterior door.
But some of them have more than one unit inside because we changed this to make sure if there was more than one unit inside, they each had to be licensed.
Well, if they're exterior entrances, we change that with the motel definition. So that's when, like, for example, 414 Wapizoo rescinded their STR licenses are now motel. Those are exterior doors. Per unit, who else am I thinking of? There's a duplex, that's 2, but those are exterior. Interior, I mean, the one that former Stafford's owned on Rose, that converted, rescinded their STR and is now a that I can't confirm. It's either a motel or hotel. So I guess if I'm not answering it, I need better clarification, I guess.
So my point being, and we'll let Rhonda speak to this and maybe she needs more information. Excuse me, Ms. Stowers. I don't think these two definitions are sufficiently distinguished. Number one. Number two, if you look at hotel and motel, and then you actually go to chapter 6 of the ordinances, which you don't have in front of you, that govern hotels and motels. There's different standards in there than under the definition of hotel, for example. So hotel in our definition says that the word transient means occupancy for less than 30 days. If you go to chapter 6.1, the definition says transients more than 10 days in any calendar year. So in getting to all this, all I'm trying to do is make sure that number one, we're clear for understanding between a short-term rental and a hotel, and that we're clear that hotel and motel that we address in here aligns with what's in chapter 6. So those are my concerns. And a suggestion that I would make also, once that's addressed by Ms. Stowers, is that each of those definitions, hotel and motel, add something at the end that says which must be licensed pursuant to chapter 6. So we make clear that hotels and motels have to comply with what's under ordinance chapter 6 to distinguish them further from short-term rentals. So that's the overview. To the extent I've fully confused everyone, I defer now to Ms. Stowers to tell me what I've gotten right, wrong, or you're wrong.
I will.
Thank you.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Ms. Stars, can you help clarify the motel hotel dilemma that Mr. Moore has?
I can try. And these are kind of nuanced definitions where they're going to be close. They're going to be similar. I looked at the state definition of STR. I didn't find it particularly helpful, the one that they've proposed in their legislation, but we may ultimately end up adopting that. But the idea being a motel has exterior doors. Every unit that is offered for stay has an exterior door. We distinguish between duplexes and motels by saying the number of doors is kind of what governs it. There has to be more than 2. And that's how we got our motel with being 3 or more exterior entrances. So that's kind of the nuance between motel and STR in terms of the number of doors. When it comes to a hotel, the idea is along the lines of, and maybe this would clarify it, would be to add a building structure or part thereof, etc., where each room or unit is through an interior door, and maybe we say from a shared public area or from a lobby and hallway, something along the lines, because we all know what a hotel is. It's trying to put that into a workable definition that doesn't conflict too much with what an STR is. So that might be one way to clarify that language a bit. In terms of adding on that they need to be licensed in terms of chapter 6, I don't have any issue with that. I do think we need, now that we do have a separate STR ordinance, it's probably worthwhile to go back and take another look at chapter 6, because there's a lot of different definitions in there that could be better coordinated with the zoning ordinance and the STR ordinance, so that all of these definitions are, if not identical, at least very similar. And that we clarify where motels fit in this whole process.
Mr. Moore.
So just to follow up too, Ms. Stowers, on that distinction between occupancy for less than 30 days that's in our hotel definition here, and that more than 10 days in any calendar year in the 6.1 definition. Thoughts?
Yeah, those serve different purposes. The one in the hotel definition is to distinguish it from a situation where you have, say, an apartment building or a lodging house like that. The purpose in chapter 6 in 6.1 or 6-1 is to make it so that if you've rented more than 10 days in any calendar year, then you're required to have a license, that you're required to do something either under chapter 6 or chapter 15 if you fit there. But the idea is anyone that's renting for more than 10 days needs to have a license.
Other questions? Comments? Mr. Moore,
So I just support clarification of that hotel definition and the addition of those references that they must be licensed pursuant to chapter 6, just to make those clear. Thank you.
anything else, Rhonda, on that?
If council person Demore wants the additional language as to hotel as well, or if the council wants to consider expanding the hotel definition to include some kind of interior door from where to help distinguish it from other types of housing that may be present in Petoskey.
Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor. I would, thanks, Ms. Stowers. I would, I'm not seeing chapter 6. I would think a definition that matches chapter 6 I'm not personally as concerned, whether I had questions in previous meetings about short-term rentals. Why would someone choose to go under one rental or one license over another? I think ultimately, I'm not sure it matters. What it matters, I think, as I sit here, it's the consistency. So with the other chapters, so I think I can't answer that other than I support the due diligence to match up with chapter 6.
Ms. Walker?
No, that's.
Okay.
Other additional,
Second, anything else? Do I have a motion?
Are those considered substantial changes?
that's a question for Rhonda. Rhonda, would you consider that to be substantial where we need another reading?
No, I would not. I mean, they already were subject to chapter 6. We're just adding a clarification, and we're not really changing the definition of a hoteler. It's just clarifying that as well. So I don't think either of those changes would rise to the level of a first read.
Mr. Moore?
I would move that we move these STR amendments forward with the understanding that the definition of hotel will be clarified or enhanced, and that both the hotel and the motel reference definitions will reference that they're to be licensed pursuant to chapter 6.
So also to include the doors from a shared public area.
I was going to leave the language to Ms. Stowers. I just said to amend the hotel.
Well, if it's not in
He was
there.
asking what you guys preferred, like hallway.
Yeah, she proposed from a shared public area after interior door.
From shared hallway or door, yeah.
To me, making this distinction relies on her speaking with Sarah and you
She
about
just did though.
what exists. Are you clear on what exists, Ms. Stowers?
In terms of the actual physical structures in Petoskey, do you mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what those are, but I'm pretty sure that if it's a hotel, it's going to have a shared public area with interior doors.
Yes, I support. However, Ms. Stowers suggests we amend it for clarity.
I'll second the motion, Mayor.
Okay. I'm letting them get this down.
Okay.
So I have a motion from Mr. Moore, a second from Mr. Shields. Any other discussion, council? I go to the public. Do you wish to speak? If you do, please come forward. Full name, full address, address council and not the audience. please rise and come on forward.
I didn't intend to say anything about this, so it's Kate Marshall, 1015 East Mitchell.
But when I agreed with proposing a hotel on Howard and Bay Street, there were going to be key fobs or codes given for rooms, and there would be no central lobby. So that's a new concept for hotels. And we've stayed in a hotel like that in Madison, Wisconsin. You just get the key fob information, you walk in, and there's no lobby. So
Sounds like a motel.
They're called hotels. I would call
Well, it sounds like a motel to me. To me, I would identify that if it was in Petoskey as a motel. I don't know, am I? Mr. Moore,
Well, I think, one of the challenges here, and nobody right now has chapter 6 in front of them, but chapter 6 is, as Ms. Stowers mentioned, is really unclear. And I think, that's part of the work that needs to be done to have clarity on these things.
and we can do that. We can revisit chapter 6 and bring it up into compliance with the other pieces quite easily, I believe. Perhaps we could have the city manager at the next meeting or the future meeting, bring that up. Some crossover between chapter 6 and these definitions. Okay, you good with that? Shane, thank you. I know we're busy with we're really busy with a lot of things, so work it into your schedule as you see fit. It does not have to be done next meeting. I go now to roll.
Shields,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Demore.
Aye.
Okay, passes 4-0. Now the adoption of a proposed resolution that would provide direction to the city staff concerning proposed amendments to Appendix A of the zoning ordinance regarding short-term rentals. And
I can just provide a brief overview. This is really for my purposes, just to get clarity on how you want me to proceed. I did, this was on Planning Commission's agenda to set a public hearing last week. I did not take it off their agenda, but they did provide feedback that they are most comfortable keeping the original zoning ordinance in place. We've had about a year underneath this zoning ordinance for short-term rentals. They would like to see more time move forward without making further changes. I think they spent, as we all know, they spent a lot of time putting this together. So having more time to evaluate that ordinance was something that they would recommend. So based on that feedback, based on some individual feedback that I've received, I really thought I needed to bring this back to, before we spend a lot of time going through this more. If there's not a consensus to do this, then certainly we'll move on to other things. So I just wanted to put this back in front of council to get further clarity. I'm sorry. So
we're going to give you just some.
No, I just wanted to make one more comment. The ordinance is somewhat vague, if you will, and it's my design. So I really didn't want to go one way or another, so I kept it neutral, and you can provide that direction to me whether you accept or reject.
Mr. Moore.
Well, to start with, now we've made changes in hotel and motel in the licensing, so we have to carry those over. I would say I'll defer to Ms. Stowers, but you have to carry those definitions over to the zoning. And the same with paragraph 2 on the next page, because that's paragraph 9 that was removed from the licensing and now needs to be in the zoning according to Michigan statute. So those 3 pieces, to my mind, have to be in there. leaving paragraph 1, I guess, as a subject of discussion. That's my viewpoint. Maybe others have other perspective.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. So I feel very strongly about adding the office service district, the list of zoning districts where STRs are included as a principal permitted use. I also feel really strongly about moving forward with section 1719 for those zoning districts where short-term rentals are a principal permitted use. Short-term rentals shall be located above the first story of the principal building. I think it's because city council is privy to information that was discussed in a closed session that impacts this and that the planning commission was not privy to. So I feel very strongly about moving forward with this as proposed.
Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor. I also, with Ms. Walker, agree with Ms. Walker and strongly support the OS Office Service District as well as section 1719.1, the definition we have here in our packet.
I will not be supporting this motion. I believe there are a ton of problems with this office service district. You can go right down to where Beckett and Rader's office is, I believe, down by the basket shop. That at one time was a home. So now are we going to allow short-term rentals to eat up property that are on the edges of the downtown? We cannot create more office opportunities or retail opportunities in this city. I believe it's taking them away. So that's one area of problems. Also, another problem with this is you start talking about when was this used as a home? Was this in 1888, 1879 when the city was incorporated? When are we talking about? Are we talking about 1820s? Document, I feel that I also have not seen one map that shows where these in the office service, what properties are we actually talking about with this? Are we talking about one piece of property or
48?
48? I'm not supportive of this. I believe.
Yeah. I don't support 1719.1. I have a number of concerns with it, but I'm going to say as a lawyer, I just can't imagine trying to apply this. I think it's amorphous. I think it's unclear. So I can't support that. I mean, to me, we have to move forward with certain of these provisions because we can't not, because what we just did in the licensing. But that provision, I don't support.
So. Anything else? There's your feedback.
I need a motion and resolution.
You wish to have a resolution to send it to someplace to the planning commission, or what do you wish to do? Those that are in favor of it.
Well, and can I ask a question? Like, isn't there a public hearing required? There would be. Okay.
There'd be a public hearing here though when we review it. Is that correct?
No, readings.
No, just 2 readings.
Okay.
So I just need somebody to make a motion accepting or rejecting the resolution.
Can we draft our own resolution on the spot here? Because the problem with that is it says all or nothing.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. Yeah. I mean, do you want me to try?
It's up to the mayor.
It's up to you, if you wish to.
I make a motion to amend the zoning ordinance to reflect any changes in the definition of hotel or motel contained in the licensing ordinance as amended, and to include section 1719(2) to reflect changes made in the licensing ordinance, and section 3, because that's connected to section 2 and the licensing changes that we made.
I second that motion.
So I'm sorry, keeping section 3 with the changes that are there under 1719.
Under 17.
Yep.
Under 1719, it would be 2 and it would be 3, because both of those reflect changes that we've already made in the licensing.
Okay.
And Ms. Stowers is still with us, so if she's hearing anything in that motion of concern, I would appreciate her input.
Ms. Rhonda, do you have any comments?
Other than the fact that the numbers change if you leave out section 1719(1). So yeah, just noting what 2 and 3 both say, realizing that we're looking at the red line version where there was a number 1 before the 2 and the 3. That's about the only thing I'd have concerns with.
Yep.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Shields.
If I may ask Ms. Stowers another question for discussion purposes?
Please.
Thank you. Ms. Stowers, regarding this, Demore's comments about the amorphous nature of 1719(1), and particularly how to define what is a house-like structure. Can you speak to that from a legal perspective? Can we tighten that up, or is from your perspective, does this have some teeth to it as it exists, or is there a way to work on it further if we were looking to define? The goal there being that some buildings have a residential feel to them. We're trying to describe that and separate those from those that don't have that feeling.
Sure. I mean, I'd be happy to work with the planning commission to kind of work through this to see if we could make it workable. I don't think it's particularly difficult. I mean, it does have some leeway in it and some ambiguity built into it, which I can appreciate. But the idea is that the applicant is required to come forward with records, either through tax records, building permits, things of that nature. So we're talking about, actual records that would show that the first story of that structure, whatever that structure is, that the first story of that particular structure, not a house that used to be there and was bulldozed and now you have a commercial building, but that exact structure on the first story was used as a single family residence or was part of a single family residence. That's kind of what I tried to capture there based on the comments and understanding that I had from what council was looking for. If we want to go by the exterior, if we even knew the types of housing that, like if they were all Cape Cod or if they were all, something, if we want to define it by the exterior rather than the interior, that might be another way to do it. It's just a question of whether or not we want to include any buildings that previously may have been residential, but we want it specifically for that bottom floor, unless what you're looking for is just, if it looks like a house, it should be a short-term rental.
Mr. Moore.
So continuing my colleagues' questions, under this current language, if a house existed and then it was modified to be a business, then could it go back to being an STR under this language?
Under this language, yes, it could. if it's that same structure.
Mr.
And-
Shield,
I'm sorry, maybe the way to do it is to put a time frame on it. Maybe if it was a residential structure by a certain year or by a certain date. I'm not entirely sure what council's looking for, but I'm sure we can work this a little more. I don't know what it would look like sitting here today.
Mr. Shield.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Ms. Towers. This to my colleagues, I feel the cap of the short-term rental does a lot of the honing in and limiting the amount of short-term rentals that'll be there. And that this particular attempt to open the short-term rentals to the house-like structures in the districts that are open to short-term rentals solves some of our problems with the existing ordinance. I think that, again, looking at the balance, I feel like this brings some of that balance into this as a community and we are regulating short-term rentals very well through this ordinance, and the cap further cements the number of short-term rentals that we are permitting that will happen, that will occur in our community. And we would support an attempt to, whether that be a time frame or a date after 1979, et cetera, or whatever it is, I'd support that.
I'm happy leaving this the way it is. We have established 40 units which have not been picked up or filled up. I know, Mr. Shields, you are in favor of 70 units or more. I feel that this protects the city's office service area from becoming inundated by short-term rentals, possibly. I think it's just clean to keep it the way it is and continue to move forward. Office service is office service. Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. If we continue to move forward and exclude Section 17.9, which is proposing to be changed, then there are current licensed short-term rentals that are not in compliance.
Again, what? There are what?
If we do not follow with 17.19 and include for those zoning districts where short-term rentals are a principal permitted use, that short-term rental shall be located above the first story of the principal building unless they can prove otherwise. There are currently licenses of short-term rentals that are not grandfathered in because they're not in residential areas. They're in commercial districts that are on the first floor that continue to get licenses every year, and they are not in compliance.
Mr. Moore.
So I think with this change of the definition of grandfathered in paragraph 9 being moved to zoning, we're not limited to grandfathering at this point, just residential. Is that right, Ms. Stowers?
That's correct.
That's correct.
So I think that those that you're referencing would still be grandfathered for now under the definition.
Even though they're on the first floor of, they're both first floor entrances of a short-term rental.
Mr. Shield.
So to clarify, those first floor units would, if they didn't fulfill their obligation to renew, they lost those would no longer be available because they're first floor.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's 1719, section 2. You know, that's where it says now, this is moved over from licensing, the property's grandfathered prior to the effective date of this ordinance or on file in the city clerk's office. Upon transfer, licensure, lap, or revocation of any licensed grandfathered property, the licensee shall be deemed to have elected not to renew his or her STR license and to have intended to abandon the license, at which point the property is no longer a grandfathered property and no longer available for short-term rental licensing. As I'm reading that, Ms. Stowers, should it read the property's grandfathered prior to the effective date of this ordinance, or should it mirror what it says in the grandfathered definition? I think it should mirror.
A minute to get to that space.
Sorry. This is 1719-2, and I'm looking at my marked up copy. Sorry, not looking at the packet copy.
I'm there. Hang on.
So this is on page 66. The number 2, almost the middle line, the property's grandfathered prior to the effective date of this ordinance. I think that should instead mirror what that new grandfather definition says, which is, as you know, properties that were properly licensed and operating as a short-term rental prior to December 18, 2023.
Right. That's what my copy already says.
Okay, it may be because I'm looking at my marked up copy. I apologize.
Yeah, the insert effective date of the prior general ordinance was my language so that we could put, because I didn't have that date handy when I was working on this, but that's the date it should be.
Not in mine. Oh, but it says the opposite. Let's see. Okay, yeah, but go down a few lines further. So it says December 18th there, I see it, but then look at the next sentence. The property's grandfathered prior to the effective date of this ordinance.
You could, and we could just take out and just say the properties grandfathered are on file at the city clerk's office.
Yeah.
And just leave out the entire middle.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Walker.
Now I'm completely confused because the property I'm speaking of is Mike and Colleen Patullo's duplex on Grove Street, which is in a business district on the west side of, on the north side of Grove Street behind the post office. So it's it's not part of the central business district, but it's like a B3 zoned area. And so they haven't been grandfathered because they're not in a residential district. They just applied for an application year after year and kept their application updated. So what you're saying is these folks are also, Mike and Colleen Patullo's property on their duplex on Grove Street, short-term rental is considered a grandfather property?
Yes, yes.
So they were operating, and I don't have the exact date, but they've been doing it 2015, 16 on, and they've done it every year. They've paid, they've gotten a license. And that is where Chapter 6 stems from. In 2013, it went into effect June 1st of 2014. So they were all being regulated as hotels. And the Patullos, because you spoke to that property, has been licensed as a hotel / vacation rental and now as an STR. So they are grandfathered. Rhonda, please chime in, but they are in an allowed district per the new ordinance, B3.
Yeah.
It is on first floor, so they don't necessarily comply with the current ordinance, but they've been operating for many years prior, so they are grandfathered.
Hence their grandfathered. Okay, thank you, because my misunderstanding was that grandfathered properties were reserved solely for residential districts,
No.
but you're clarifying that.
There's a few more, I mean, and obviously according to the ordinance and the definition, upon intending to abandon, didn't renew timely, transferred, sold, doesn't matter if it's commercial or residential, they lose their grandfathering status. There's one in Buckley that just happened.
Yes,
And I just got an application and it has been denied.
because that previous one was grandfathered and now with transfer of ownership or loss of,
Yep, transfers ownership. Yep, it's
thank you.
sold.
Thank you for the clarification.
Mhm.
Mr. Moore.
No, I just want to say to my colleague that makes sense, that confusion, because at the beginning, when we were first drafting all this, that's what we were focused on, was grandfathered. Yeah, residential, yeah.
Any other discussion? Does the public wish to weigh in on this? Please come forward, your full name, full address, address council, not the audience. Push the button to make it green.
Make it green, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm here as a distressed citizen, having come to the last council meeting because I was concerned about the language, formerly the House, blah, 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 blah. And then I got really concerned when Lindsay started talking about, well, we're not supposed to say anything but closed session. And I thought, wait a minute. So I went through all my records. I know there was a closed session, but there was never a motion that came out of that closed session to even undertake this action from council. Then I went to the planning commission meeting, and in all fairness, what I witnessed at the planning commission meeting, maybe in alternate reality, but Mr. Horn went there. He asked the planning commission to not schedule a public hearing because there was no motion from council to create this language. Then it was asked, should the planning commission make any comments? Well, sure, go ahead. So they made many comments, and including Mr. Icoangelo, who I have been told wrote this legal description of a farmer house. And he said, well, the former house will be a structure that is intact. So if it was a house and was added on to or changed to be a business, it would not go back to being a house. And that addresses something that Rhonda said. So they went on, and they were not in favor formally of changing this ordinance. Cynthia asked Mr. Horn, should we make a motion for council? No, you don't need a motion. So I feel like watching this, it's been a messy, no motions, but let's make an action. And I hope that you will create a process where you either decide through a motion to go forward or you don't. But if you do, there must be a public hearing. There must be an opportunity for the citizens to speak.
There will be.
There you go. Thanks.
Anyone else wishes to speak to council at this time? Is there anybody online that wishes to speak to council at this time?
No.
No. I go to Ms. Beck for roll call.
So I'm clear in making these minutes. There was a motion by Demore, seconded by Murphy, to accept amendments to the zoning ordinance that reflects any changes of the definition of hotel or motel as contained in the licensing ordinance, and to include section 1719(2) and 3, which with the changes would actually become 1719(1) and 2. That's what I have a motion for in a second. So I will do roll call on that unless there needs to be amendment of that motion.
Mr. Moore.
I see one other thing here, and that's that paragraph 4 under 1719 has been crossed out. Is that part of the changes to licensing as well, Ms. Stowers? It's a single line number 4 under 1719. Again, I'm looking at my marked up copy, sorry.
No, I'm looking at the marked up copy too, so that helps. The paragraph number 4 was to add language that it has to be in compliance with the regulatory ordinance, which is already included up above in paragraph 3, that short-term rentals are required to meet all other provisions of chapter 15 of the Petoskey Code of Ordinances and et cetera. So by putting that in there, it's already in there.
Right, so I would amend my motion to make sure that that number 4 is omitted as well, because it would be duplicative of what's now number 3. And do I need to say something about this going to a public hearing? Is that included in the existing?
No, that's automatic. Always zoning always happens at planning commission. And then we have at least 2 readings for any ordinance. It's my understanding, Rhonda has explained that anything to do with zoning here goes to the planning commission level.
So Ms. Stowers or my colleagues, does anyone feel I've missed anything based on what we talked about? Okay.
No.
Thank you.
So roll call, right?
Please.
Demore. Murphy.
No.
Nope.
Why?
You supported the motion.
I support the motion. Yes, I'm sorry.
So you support those
Yeah.
changes we discussed?
Yeah.
Okay. So Demore is an aye. Murphy is an aye.
I'm sorry.
Shields
No.
and Walker. No.
The motion is 2-2, so it fails.
Yep.
Well, this is problematic. Right.
Please.
So we still need Ms. Stowers' help here, because the changes that we made in the licensing that are essential to have in the zoning ordinance have not been carried over to that. So what happens now? That can't happen.
Mayor.
Rhonda, do you have something to say?
I thought Councilperson Walker had something first, but
Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have to justify my no vote, but if we don't address the 2 in the middle that were not included in the motion, I don't understand what happens to those.
You can make another motion right now and help clean it up some.
Mayor,
Please.
may I suggest that
You're asking for a motion to make a motion?
So what I'm asking for is if we remove those 2 in the middle that are not, were not just included in the motion, and that we do something with those. And then the motion to change the motel and the section 1719 2 and 3 of the grandfathering language could be reproposed, but addressing the 2 that we removed. What happens to those 2? Can we table those 2 for another discussion when we have full council participation and vote? Is that possible?
They could come back up for discussion in the future.
Because what I would say right now is that I could repropose a different motion, holding the 2 in the middle of office services in section 1719-1, and table that part of the discussion, but move forward with a proposal that would vote on the motel definition in section 1719 2 and 3.
You can make a motion and just rule out those other ones.
That's the motion I already made.
But I I didn't have that clarity, Tina, when I was just voting a few minutes ago. We didn't say anything about tabling. We didn't say anything about those two pieces.
By the motion, those were already eliminated, weren't they? Rhonda?
Yeah, the motion was to only, for planning commission to only consider the other things mentioned, but I mean, planning commission can take up as much or as little of this as they want, but I think it is important to give them direction of certain pieces that are fairly critical pieces.
And that's what I thought that's what we were doing was with this motion, with this support. Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I make a motion to table this ordinance until a later meeting with full council.
I'd entertain a motion that would eliminate the middle piece of this, to send it to council. If you wish to entertain that, I will support that. Ms. Demore.
So here's my concern about tabling this, Ms. Stowers, if you would. We now have passed a licensing ordinance that omits important language. And that's moving forward without the adjacent language being replaced in the zoning ordinance. So that would be my concern about tabling this at this point. Your input, please.
This is something that needs to be done, and it should be done as soon as possible, quite frankly. I was a little surprised that Planning Commission didn't move forward with it at their last meeting. I think it would be helpful to have it in place, especially prior to the extent possible, prior to the start of the new year. We do have licensing re-ups coming up here in December and November, and we're kind of running out of time for that.
What happens in the interim for any applications or any situations that would have consequences under paragraph 9 that we have now omitted and not reinstituted in the zoning ordinance?
Can that be reinstituted minus the office service?
This paragraph that was omitted has critical language about transfer, licensure, lab revocation that no longer exists.
In the licensing ordinance you're talking about?
Yes.
It's in the licensing.
It got moved. It's not, paragraph 9 got moved to zoning.
Yes. 49. 49, number 9. Looking at your clean version.
That's.
Okay, I'll make a motion. Or do we already have a motion on the table? Derek has a motion on the table that has not been supported, right?
What's,
Okay.
Was there a motion? What's the concern? What's
I
the,
see shaking of heads. I don't understand.
where are we, folks?
Rhonda, I'm looking at page 49 of the packet. Is paragraph 9 supposed to still be in there?
That is the paragraph that was intended to be moved to the zoning ordinance. I've been looking at that amended version, and it should not be in there.
Okay.
But it is in the packet and still there. So if the version that was approved has that in there, I'm just looking, as it is still in there and was voted on, I think we leave it in place until we can get the zoning ordinance done, and then at which point we can remove it.
I'm concerned now about the differences between the marked up version and what's attached as the final version in the licensing. I assume that the marked up version would be mimicked by the clean version.
And it looks like somehow paragraph 9 it was crossed out and then it was somehow re-added. Because even on the marked up version, it's in there twice, once crossed out and once not. But again, if the planning commission's not ready to move on this, my recommendation would be to leave it in as it's already in there.
Well, that's a weird coincidence.
It's helpful this time.
Well, Derek's motion didn't get any support. So does that mean, someone can propose a new motion?
Sure.
Thanks, Mayor. Okay, I'm gonna try this. I would make a motion with the due diligence that was accomplished this evening in regards to language, that I make a motion to propose the motel definition update, add with 3 or more exterior entrances, and to add section 1719 of the grandfathering language added from licensing ordinance, which includes section 3 as well. And that we table the 2 add office services and section 1719 for a further date.
Why don't you leave those out and they can be addressed at a future date? Why would you want it? Why table? I mean, you can bring them back up at a future meeting.
Okay, Mayor. So instead of, okay, I would make a proposal to add motel definition update and section 1719 too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And motion.
So essentially, that's the same motion that I made earlier, except it left out a hotel and it left out paragraph 3 and the omission of paragraph 4. So would you like me to just revive my earlier motion because it's the same?
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah, you can revise it, but you can't change the motion that you made. That's set. Now we'll go to the.
Well, respectfully, the motion that Lindsay made, if I understand it, you were amending the motel definition based on the licensing.
Right.
You were amending 1719 paragraph 2. And what I'm saying is that's missing the revision of the hotel definition in paragraph 1719.3.
Okay.
And the omission of 1719.4.
That's correct. I did not include 3, and I did not include the crossed out 4 section. But that was my intention, to say 2 and 3.
Can you add 4?
And 4, but 4's crossed, I mean, I guess, for legality reasons, is that why you need me to mention that? Because it's
Yes,
crossed out?
It's
Okay.
gonna be
And
omitted.
because of, and the omission of 4.
And hotel, are you including that in your motion too?
Where does it say that here?
The first definition under number 1.
Motel definition update, hotel motel definition update.
New person.
If I can chime in.
Please. Sarah.
It's the same motion.
It's sounding like your revised motion is the exact same thing as the original motion that failed, so I don't believe you can do another motion that's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So unless I'm hearing differently, unless Rhonda actually, I can defer to Ms. Stowers. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'm hearing.
I want to know what's happening to the 2 middle sections. Then I want to understand if we're passing these motel definition, hotel definition in section 1719, 2 and 3, and no longer 4, then what happens to those 2 ones in the middle that we're not approving?
Die. They die. They're not included.
Okay, so that's why I voted no.
Rhonda, could you help, please? Give some guidance.
Well, as I understand it, there seems to be a consensus in the sense of the 2 motions, both that they require the planning commission to consider the revised definition of hotel, the revised definition of motel, the grandfathering language of 1719, the omission of the section 4 and the addition of the Petoskey Code of Ordinances portion of paragraph 3. But Councilperson Walker's motion added that consideration of whether or not Planning Commission should consider the office services district and what's currently 1719-1 was going to be tabled to the next city council meeting where it can be addressed by the full council as to whether or not that portion should also be sent to Planning Commission. So it did have an aspect of a motion that maybe wasn't included in the first.
Thank you.
As I understood the motion.
That was way articulate, and that is exactly what I was trying to capture. Thank you.
Before discussion, do I have a second?
Right.
Second to motion.
I have a second. A motion from Ms. Walker, a second from Mr. Shields. Discussion. If we know further discussion, I take the public for comments. There being no comment, I take it to City Clerk Beck for roll.
DeVorn
It goes by the person that made the motion.
doesn't have to.
I prefer it.
Walker,
Yes.
Shields,
Yes.
DeVorn,
Aye.
and Murphy.
Yes. After the continued discussion for the use of the ARPA funds. So that was City Manager Horn.
This is essentially a placeholder. I was asked just to keep this on the agenda for further input and discussion. So that's why it's
Thank you.
on your agenda.
Council, you wish to make a discussion on this issue? Mr. Moore.
I guess the only thing I want to say is, for me, I don't have the information that I need. It looks like there's interest around using this money for the winter sports park, but I just don't have the information I need to make that decision. Personally, I think it'd be very helpful to have input from the various stakeholders. Rotary is certainly a stakeholder, Parks and Recs is a stakeholder, figure skaters are a stakeholder, folks who do curling are stakeholders. I mean, there's a number of people who have interests in this, and we've got a gem and we want to make it better, and we have some money to invest toward it, but I just don't have enough information at this point. Thank you.
Personally, I'm fine with putting it in the general fund with the earmark that it is going to be used for the winter sports park. Following a master plan for the winter sports park, which will have public input involved. It will ultimately come back to City Council to make decisions on how are we going to fund the winter sports park. But I think to say how we're going to spend the money now, it's a large chunk of money that the City Council and the City of Petoskey does not often have the opportunity to receive. I believe it should not be nickel and dime here to there, a little piece here, a little there. I think it should go to a large project, and I think the winter sports park is that large project. I think it's time for us to put some oomph into that, whether we have to look at we just need to get a master plan for the winter sports park to proceed. And I think that's a very doable thing to do with this council and with public input. So I'm fine with taking this funds, earmarking it for the winter sports park, and putting it in the general fund where it will not be spent on anything else other than winter sports park. Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor. To clarify, so in that action, does that mean it's not necessarily going to the pavilion? There's a discussion to be had. It's for the winter sports park, and future discussions could determine based off of council and the community how it's spent.
Soon, like as soon as we get a master plan, we can start saying how we're going to spend it. Will that money likely go into a big pot that will go towards the pavilion? Yes, that's why I feel the pavilion, you know, we've received a lot of funds, and I think we need to finish that project. Mr. Shields.
If council voted against that in the consensus, then it would go to, so it could go to the pavilion, it could go to a different determination based off of this process of master planning.
It'd have to go to something in the winter sports park.
Got it. Thank you.
Which I'm sure, I believe there are lots of places to spend it at the winter sports park. Ms. Demore.
So I'm going to say this, and I mean it in the most respectful and constructive fashion. I have lost confidence in this process. And I've lost confidence in this process because the $100,000 that we did advocate to the winter sports didn't show up in the CIP. And the $550,000 that we did not discuss at this table ever showed up in the CIP. So while from a practical perspective, this proposal to put it in the general fund and delineate it for this purpose makes sense, I don't have confidence in this process right now that our voices and the voices of all the constituents who have an interest in this will be heard, and that once again, it's going to be moved or allocated in some way. And again, I mean this respectfully. I'm telling you honestly where I am with this right now.
I will say that $100,000 that was not in the CIP, I went immediately, talked to our city manager. It was an oversight. I don't have a problem with an oversight. It was not done deliberately to hide anything. It was left off of that capital improvement piece. I'm fine with moving forward with it the way it is. I feel that 100,000, we aren't gonna have to use all of that matching money that came from the county, 50 and 50,000, 50 ours, 50 county for ARPA. I do not believe it's gonna take all that amount of money to do a design for the winter sports park. My thoughts and intention was that rest of that money would go towards possibly repairing some of the repairs that are needed in there to keep this winter sports park functioning now until we come up with a master plan. Could it be the deck that does need to be repaired? Fine. The bathroom, something like that? Fine. But I believe that we have a plan in place. We discussed it. I have confidence when you earmark something that it is going to be there in general fund. Mr. Shields.
I do share some of the frustrations Councilwoman DeMore has shared. I do feel like this is the process, the messy process of getting these different voices, information, data that we've had through the last few months of discussing this, that we've learned that there are some other priorities and possibilities for the winter sports park. So I do feel like that I trust the process that those would be considered in future discussions and ultimately, come down to a consensus vote by the council. So outside of another option for having this discussion in more robust ways to make a decision, I do feel the need to allocate the ARPA money versus something else versus losing it. So short of another solution, I would support the practical nature of allocating it to the winter sports park with the expectation that we'd have an open discussion of all the possibilities for using that money to whether that is down the road for something that it doesn't quite. So just an example, the icing, that is the money doesn't solve that problem. The icing, what's the word I'm looking for? Refrigeration, thank you. But there can be in a master plan a vision how to get there. And so I hear us moving towards that direction to set those goals and those targets. So I think that's some positive.
City Manager Horn, will we be losing grant money for the pavilion if this 600,000 or it isn't found in a savings that we have, a backdrop fund? If it isn't that, do we risk the opportunities of losing grant money?
It's always possible. We are going back to our grant organizations and seeing if we can have a little bit more leeway with grant dollars, as well as Rotary. Potentially if we could use grant resources to replace the concrete, to put some sleeves, if you will, outside of the concrete to be able to put up a large, maybe a tent. And so instead of a pavilion, we're going to do some sort of if we have a large event there, we could, and you've probably seen these out in other event spaces where they bring in, steel, sleeves and put in the ground that are already made for that. So maybe transitioning away from the full blown pavilion into more of a, take it up, take it down for an event type of scenario to kind of try to save some cost that way. So we're exploring those things. I don't have answers to those questions right as I stand today, but potentially trying to get approval from our grant organizations and those that have provided private dollars to this to at least try to do the surface, get that surface ready for a tent system, if you will, to be able to do something underneath a shelter. So just as another option for council to consider at some point. I would say that I'm hearing different in my city manager listserv and in guidance that I'm getting. The definition of obligation has been a little hard to pin down. Now what I'm hearing is funds you have to be under contract to meet the definition of obligation. So I'm trying to get that figured out to make sure that we meet the intent of what the definition is. So I guess that is to be determined, and trying to get more guidance on what that means instead of earmarking the funds. That if we have to be actually under contract.
Yeah, if that's the situation, will you come back? And you'll come back as soon as you know, and we can then address this again at the council. If we have to come up and say it's time to make a commitment to something under contract. So, Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Shane, for that clarification. So if I am understanding correctly, by putting the ARPA funds, allocating those funds to the general fund budget, does that suffice as a placeholder in the interim and allows us to move forward, or does it have to be very specific?
He doesn't know yet.
Sorry, it doesn't sound like that meets the definition of obligation. So that's what I need to really figure that out. My concern is, what are we actually going to be under contract with by the end of the year? I don't know what that looks like at the Winter Sports Park. So maybe this conversation becomes something much different.
Okay.
So I guess be thinking about that, and I will be doing my due diligence, and maybe by the next meeting, I'll have firmer feel for what that looks like, and maybe some options that we can get under contract and get that box checked, if you will, appropriately.
So until we get information from Shane, we're not going to be able to make any major decisions on this.
I mean,
unless you make a commitment and say 600,000 goes towards the pavilion, period. Mr. Moore.
At the last meeting, and Mr. Shields, you can correct me if I got this wrong, but it was my understanding that Mr. Shields was proposing that you go back to these grant providers and Rotary and talk about more expansive uses of these grant funds, not just different uses for the pavilion, but did I read you?
Rotary was here and stated, stated that they were willing to work with the city.
So I'm following up on what Mr. City Manager just said, because it sounded like the dialogue was directed at different ways to undertake the pavilion. So my question is, are you also inquiring if these different funding entities are open to the use of the funds in other aspects of the park? Thank you.
Well, I'm focused on the pavilion area because that's what the grant was built around. So because we don't have the funds to do this. So if we don't have the funds to build a $1.2 million pavilion, then let's put that money into what we do have funds to do. And that would be the surface. That would be potentially preparing the surface for a future chiller. If that was council's desire. Transitioning totally away from that section of the park, I think would be problematic for a grant organization.
Right.
But I mean, certainly I will go with whatever city council would like me to ask.
I support the pavilion. I don't support the refrigeration of it at 1.2 million. And the problem is the maintenance and the upkeep on that is I've heard 50 to 80 to $100,000 a year would be spent on that operation. For the short period that it's used, for the few people that are going to use it, I do not feel it is the best use of city tax dollars. I just don't believe chilling is the way to go at this point. We have a pavilion that just has one side closed. You have three open sides. If you had a building that was totally closed, maybe chilling is the way to go. But I don't see it as in an open situation like this being feasible, and especially the cost of 1.2 million. I'm saying do the pavilion. It's a 4 seasonal use. It will have some hockey. It'll have some sports events. It'll have some, and it will also have the ability to utilize it spring and fall when I don't think it needs to be chilled. The chilling would be in such a small amount of time, but that's my opinion. I've changed my mind on the chilling, especially with the cost of 1.2 million in the maintenance yearly cost to keep it upright and running. That's all.
The problem that I'm having with this discussion is that the underlying assumption is that the $550,000 remaining of ARPA funds will be used for the pavilion. Even the past president of the Rotary Club came and offered up that they potentially might have interest in another aspect. I'm interested to know that information. I think that's important information to have. I'm only one voice.
I get the feeling Rotary will work with the city. Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor, and I respect your opinion on the chiller and the pavilion situation. I see it differently in regards to what I've heard from constituents about the value of the Winter Sports Park and the desire to invest in the aspects to make it a winter sports park, and that outside of a chilling unit in a changing climate, the idea of having ice for any sort of period is we're not going to have that. So this is a method to make that winter sports park continue into the future to be have winter sports activities. Yes, it's costly. So I would then, if this was on the table, I would put it out to the community, say, is this something we want, and get more feedback. I would start out by the position right now is I think there's interest. I've heard interest of going that route. And if the funding agencies would also get behind that, that's something I could get behind, knowing that it is expensive and we should have that full public input on that plan. As we're getting now public input on the pavilion plan, and the idea of tracing back the past discussions on the pavilion. It was my understanding the match was always going to come from Rotary or some other fundraising. And so having the match come from public dollars, and I'll lump up into those public dollars, it needs more public comment time. And the comments I'm getting at this point are, no, we'd rather invest money into, that's like too expensive, we'd rather invest into something that's going to assist the winter sports activities. So that's where I sit right now, why I have that opinion.
Yeah. I also have constituents of the city who have contacted me and said 1.2 million in our operation costs for the rest of each year, so much for a couple of months, that it's put the money to fix the winter sports park instead of chilling it. That's what I've heard. So we're all good. We all get different feedback from different people, and you're elected to make these hard decisions, and I don't mind stepping up and stating how I feel about it and being okay with it. Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. So from what I understand, Shane has to do some more research to find out if that money has to be allocated to a specific project, and we may or may not have to be under contract, and that would be for 2025. And that would also impact the fact that the ARPA money must be spent by the end of the calendar year of 2026. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So after the fact-finding mission, if there is an urgency for allocating the money to the general fund, or we could potentially lose funds from the state or from the nonprofit organization that has done the fundraising, I think that needs to be made clear to us when we go forth for another vote. So I realize that there's missing information, but it's helpful to frame it if there is an urgency that it could damage a relationship, or that we would risk not receiving the funds potentially. That is just things that I would like to know when weighing, and I know that there's more research to be done. So if I could have that sense of clarity when we go to have a proposal at our next meeting, or make a motion or vote or hold a public hearing, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Well, I guess we had discussion, so that's what the purpose was discussion. City Manager Horn will come back with information on how specific this needs to be spent without losing it. Okay?
Thank you.
New business, adoption of a proposed resolution that would approve programs and services, establish an assessment district, and direct that the assessment will be prepared for subsequent review by City Council.
We've already kind of gone through that. So if you have any further questions, Amy's still.
Otherwise, a motion is second, then we can have more discussion if you want.
Mayor, I'll make a motion.
Please.
Make a motion to conduct a scheduled public hearing to consider adoption of a resolution as required by city code provisions.
A second motion.
Any other discussion? Ms. DeMore.
So I just have one question for Ms. Tweeden. When I asked the question about the public art expenditures being moved to the parking fund, and you said that's where the capital project funds are held.
Yes.
What other capital project funds are held there in the parking fund?
It would be parking, the three major projects next year are the reconstruction of the sale lot, the donation or contribution to the Park Avenue Parks projects, and purchase of pay stations are three of the capital expenditures for next year. We put the public art funding within what had been the facade grant program, but we're taking a pause from doing a grant program, and which will be explained more when we're talking budget, but doing more placemaking projects and more priority projects, because the facade grant programs, it isn't run its course. We'll probably do it again, but we were just getting, I want to do an awning, I want to, do some painting, and nothing that was impactful for downtown.
Thank you.
Other discussion? Public wish to weigh in? I go to Ms. Beck for roll. Did somebody wish to speak? I didn't see your hand.
Keith Monson, 1034 Rockazoo. You didn't allow any public comment on the ARPA funds. Is that because there was no motion? Or
There was nothing to, there was no decision made. other than just a feedback to the city manager.
Okay, can I ask? Mr. Mayor, you made a comment, the grant was for the pavilion. Are you talking about the Rotary donation? Thank you.
Yes, the grant was for the, is that your only question or is there more?
I have some more.
I just heard there was an accident that $100,000 designated for the Winter Sports Park was left out of the CIP. I just heard that if council didn't act, we could lose $550,000 for the pavilion. The $550,000 was never designated for the pavilion. I just heard the city manager say he needs more time and input, and I hear that every meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Anyone else wish to speak? There being none, I go to Ms. Beck for roll.
Shields,
Yes.
Walker, West, Demore,
Aye.
Murphy.
Yes. Next is the first reading proposed proposed ordinance amending the sign ordinance and creating a new mural ordinance. City manager on for info.
Yeah, so this kind of starts the process of removing, the sign committee is updating and revising the sign ordinance. Currently murals are included in the ordinance, but we're talking about removing that from the sign code, and then murals would be managed by or considered by the Art Commission. So there's essentially two ordinances here related to this. The first removes murals from the sign code. The second establishes a procedure for review and approval of murals on buildings that would be managed by the Art Commission. More questions?
So I have a couple questions in the first portion called sign ordinance under number 2. Am I understanding correctly that the murals themselves are the decision about the murals are entirely decided by the commission? It looks like it reads like the guidelines are prepared by the Art Commission and approved by the city council. But then the commission is going to approve the artwork. Is that what's happening? And the reason I'm asking this question is it concerns me just a bit because there's only one elected official on the commission, if that's how it's happening.
Right.
So that's one concern that I have about what we have here. And then I also, in the mural ordinance, if you look at the definition of a mural and a sign, there's a lot there for a sign. There's a lot of ors and ifs, but if you read it and you pick out certain words, which you can do reading it, I'll do it now, it really does not distinguish a sign from a mural. So a mural is a hand-produced work of visual art that's tiled or painted by hand directly upon or affixed directly to an exterior wall of a building. So if I pick out words from the sign definition, would be any pictorial representation that is a structure or part of a structure painted that attracts attention to the subject thereof. That's virtually the same as the definition of the mural. So I'm wondering, like, do we have counsel looking at this or how did this get drafted?
The planner drafted it.
Yeah, I would ask that legal counsel review
They get
this.
the packet. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah, legal gets our packet.
So did Ms. Stowers review this?
I don't know.
Well, that'd be my request that we have legal counsel review it.
We have time. We have time for this because we have nothing coming in the mural area at this point, I feel. I don't think anybody's gonna be doing a mural today. Next month through the winter. I think we have time to get this right. with your concerns,
I have a question.
please.
So in my experience, sign ordinances are really legally complex and legally fraught because they deal with First Amendment rights. They're really complicated. So I just want to ask if the sign committee is getting legal support as needed with this drafting process.
Oh, I'll send it back to him.
No, she had a question
I
about
don't,
this.
I don't think the attorney is attending their meetings, no.
No, I don't think she needs to attend the meetings, but if the sign committee needs legal assistance in doing this, is that available to
Sure,
them?
yeah. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Shields.
Thanks, Mayor. Mr. Moore, since you raised that question, I just want to ask a process question because in doing so, that's that we as a community, city will acquire more legal fees to do more reviews of those versus professional staff, planning staff that write these. In the instant, maybe opens up the doors through some legal action in the future, which would have costs. But maybe I'm just wondering, like, this is more kind of like a cost benefit analysis of whether we pay that money up front or wait, and if it's necessary, pay it later. Another question, you hear my question there of due diligence of responsible for funds. Is there a time? No disrespect to your expertise here, to hold back from extra legal oversight expenses if this is, hearing that it's coming from a professional planner, Nina Ryan, their professional ability to write these as well. I just wonder what that balance is. We don't have to answer that. I just want to throw that question into.
No, I'm happy to answer. I'll say two things. One, I would never hold myself out to be a professional planner. And I think a professional planner is not a legal person. So I wouldn't expect them to be able to anticipate those sorts of things, even if they're experienced. That's number one. Number two, I've been both a litigator and a mediator, and I can tell you that the more proactive you are, the less money you spend. Yep. And so that's my concerns in looking at this, but I appreciate your question. Thank you.
So, Ms. Walker.
It seems to me that it makes sense to remove like murals from the sign ordinance. And I don't know if if like one is a easier thing, I'm not like for ease, but if one makes more sense to acknowledge now, and then the other one becomes a mural ordinance falling under the auspice of the Arts Commission. That seems to be like a new thing. So it's like removing one from the sign ordinance and putting it in the realm of the Arts Commission. Are these like two pieces?
Yeah, I wouldn't remove that from the sign ordinance until we have a companion for, yeah.
Thank you. That answers my question.
We have coverage.
Mr. Shield.
Yeah, I just want to say I definitely generally support this action.
But we need, if it needs wordsmithing, then it should. You have concerns? Mr. Moore?
Oh, no, I support it. Oh, sorry. I support this moving forward. I just always want to make it the best that it can be.
Do you see holes in it?
Those that I mentioned.
Well, we can hold this until
I think this is just a first reading, right?
right. But I also wanted pointed out what is some stuff that will move it to the second reading and possible motion and passing by the city council. So if there's other things that are in here that you are not comfortable with, now's a good time to share them with Shane so that we can doctor it to where you want it.
Well, just remember, it needs to be the entire council.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm looking at Miss Walker right now. Mr. Shields.
With the section 8402, number 1, where it talks about, this is page 77. Murals shall not be placed on the primary, what's that word, facade of the structure. So it's not, so the goal of that one is we don't want murals facing public roads. Is that the goal of, I'm just trying to understand that intent. In wondering if there will be situations in the future where we'd want a mural on facing a public street. Is that unnecessary to put in here if ultimately it's decided by a public body, well, Arts Commission and then the city council? Just a question.
I requested that mural.
What do you all think about that?
Are you thinking that murals should come back or art should all come back for approval by city council? I see Ms. Walker saying no.
I think that an Arts Commission has been appointed, and I think that they have artistic license to approve the location of murals.
I agree. I'm not saying that. I agree. I'm saying, do we want to pull out the Art Commission's ability to say, no, a mural could go on facing a public street, because this regulation would take that opportunity away from them without an ordinance change.
How do you feel?
I genuinely want to keep more options open. I haven't thought through what that would mean, what it could look like. So that's why I'm feeling the water to see if that's, everybody's like, yeah, no, we definitely don't want murals facing public streets because of this, and I didn't think about that.
Ms. Walker.
When I think about murals on public streets, does that also include, like, if both facades are facing, it said here, a public street, then neither facade would qualify to have a mural on it. But what if the facade was facing a public parking lot? Is that included there as well? I'm thinking about, like, the grain train, for example. What if they wanted to go with, like, a cooperative mural and got a grant from them and got approved by the Arts Commission, and they wanted to put a mural facing the parking lot there, that's actually a public parking lot managed by the city of Petoskey. Would that not qualify because it does face a public parking lot? Because it's just saying public street here.
Yeah, it's just street, so that would be fine.
Define street, is it looking straight on, or is it I'm on a street and looking over the top of two buildings and I can see something in the background? Is that good or not?
Yeah, maybe I'd be interested in this kind of.
You're driving up the street and it was a Cook Hardware. You don't know what that is. Vinyl music place, okay? Up on one of those walls that's facing outward. It's not technically facing the street, but yet it's a large wall that you can see from a street. Is that considered a no-go or okay?
Questions, yeah. I would tend to want to leave that to the Arts Commission to make that call.
Okay. I can tell you that there are two other people that are on there besides myself. There is Amy Tweeden from the Downtown Management Board, which is an employee of the city. There's also Kendall Smith, who is Parks and Rec Director, is also on that commission. So there's 3 people involved that are connected more or less to the city or to myself being elected. You ready to send this on to second reading, or do you want more time, or what do you feel? I see no emergency in this if you feel that you need more time to look it over, because nobody's gonna be doing a mural. Nobody's gonna come to us and say, I want to do a mural in January or February, so you do have some time to. This is not one with a bullet to your head to make a decision now. How's that?
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. I like the idea of walking around, asking people those questions I have.
Okay.
So with potential, I mean, the potential, we could move to a second reading, there's potential if I learn here more that I would make that recommended change, but, as I still sit here right now, I don't have information to make that suggestion.
Yeah. So we'll call this the first reading and
Maybe.
look at it at second. Okay? Good, everybody? Mr. Moore, what's your feeling?
I put my comments on the record, my concerns.
Okay. All right. Moving on. One more thing, adoption of a proposed resolution that would approve the Michigan Arts and Culture Council grant agreement for project support and professional services supporting an art installation at Sunset Park. And go turn it over to City Manager Horn.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have applied and received not our full amount, which as I looked at the applicants, I don't think many people or maybe no one received their full requested amount. So we're fortunate to be able to get some funds out of this. So essentially 12,900 for Sunset Park artwork, with the matching fund requirement being $3,225. So the grant agreement is in front of you, just asking for authorization to execute.
Motion.
I'd be happy to make a motion, Mayor, to consider approval of the grant agreement with the Michigan Arts and Culture Council.
Do I have a second?
Support.
Okay, motion from Ms. Walker, second from Ms. Demore. Discussion, questions? Ms. Demore?
Just one question, confirming the match is $2,225, is that what you said?
$3,225.
Thank you.
Mr. Shields?
And this, also with this, for clarification, would there be additional money if this was delayed? Prices, costs go up, we'd have to have additional match, kind of in light of grants for the Winter Sports Park and delay. This is for arts that we don't currently have identified.
We do have an identified
Okay.
project. The proposal has been sent out 2 days ago.
Yeah, we don't know what those numbers are yet. But this allocation would go towards that project. So
The proposal is of 30 to 55,000.
yeah, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, proposal sent out. And it is sent out more than just to the state of Michigan that like this art in the tunnel was. This is going out any place and every place. We got somebody from the Netherlands or Germany that says they're coming over because they're camping here to do it. It's anybody that wants to apply for this project will have availability.
So as I understand, this is a project that we're going to need to commit more money at some point. This, any little bit helps.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay.
Comments? I go to Ms. Beck for roll.
Yes.
Demore.
Aye.
Shield.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Thank you, council, for supporting the arts movement in this town. I think it's past due and it's gonna be a success for everybody. With that, city council comments, I go to Miss Ward 1, Miss Demore.
I just want to briefly give a shout out to Marty Flynn and Chad Bradley of the Public Works Department, who did an absolutely awesome job shepherding around the Petoskey Youth Advisory Council folks to all things water, public works in the city of Petoskey. I learned a lot. It was really interesting. And that same evening, one of the students said they wanted to see if they could volunteer in the water treatment plant. So that's pretty cool. Thank you.
Mr. Shields, Ward 2.
Over over 90% of downtown commercial spaces are filled, so only 10% vacancy is for the whole downtown, which is good. But on the 400 block of East Mitchell, on both sides, it's only a 32% occupancy rate, as I understand. So that, you know, when we hear comments about there being vacant spaces downtown, it's pretty clearly it's focused on that 400 block. It's very visible. Impacts neighbors, neighboring businesses, and this impacts, I think we can argue, the quality of life, and it impacts our economic vibrancy in our community. So I appreciate the earlier discussion about a potential work session about how to address these. And you know, if there is discussion or topics related to this that need to be discussed in a closed session, I would encourage us to keep that as a possibility, so we can try to problem solve and to see what together what options we have to address these vacancies. Again, 32% on the 400 block of East Mitchell on both sides.
Thank you. Ward 4, Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to say thank you to the city of Petoskey and Mayor Murphy for the third proclamation for Indigenous Peoples Day. I think it's been a great learning opportunity for our community, and there is several interactions on last Monday on a Chamber of Commerce's social media page in honoring and celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, and people really not knowing or understanding what the theme of that holiday is. And nobody is saying that you cannot celebrate Columbus if that's what you so choose. It is more of an honoring of Indigenous resiliency and culture and language in the face of cultural genocide and colonialism. And so Americans are free to celebrate and honor both of those groups of people, whether it be Christopher Columbus and that from colonization, or celebrating Indigenous resiliency. So it's a great learning opportunity for our community, and I am grateful that the city of Petoskey has taken charge and been very clear about their intentions in celebrating Indigenous sovereignty. So thank you for that.
No further business come before this council. I call this meeting what? Do you wish to find a date to meet with the Downtown Management Board? More dates.
6 is still on table.
They propose the 6th, or we wait until after the first of the year.
6th of November.
The day after election.
It seems like we should try to have this discussion before the budget, I would think, or.
Yeah. But if we can do this 6, so that's the only option. I agree, having it before the budget seems brilliant, but
I can make the 6th.
They couldn't come up with any other dates than
I think the
that?
dates that we had talked about, they couldn't get consensus on. Do you recall that, Mayor, at your meeting? I don't know that we looked into December much, but I know everybody's December calendar is a little iffy, but if there's just December, well, that's still before, need to do that before the budget, so.
If you want to suck it up and do it on the 6th and get it over with, I'm fine with that.
were there other Wednesdays? It was Wednesdays. I don't know if we discussed Wednesdays. We were looking at Mondays and Tuesdays.
He talked to Amy, and this is what he came up with from Amy. What was, here's a date, the 6th, everybody can make it. Or what?
I'm open to that. I'm open to the 5th or the 6th.
November 6th.
I'm fine too, I guess. I'd like to start it early and get out early.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock then?
6 o'clock.
Or is there any,
Is it interested in going to?
I don't know about DMB though.
Can you do 5 if the DMV can do 5?
It'd be the 6th.
5 plus, oh, excuse me, yes, that's how I'm yes.
Okay, so it's scheduled for 6 unless the DMV can go at 5 and then we do it at 5 and he will let us know, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.